Statement, the Lord President of the Council and the Leader of the House of Commons, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I don't need patience because proceedings in this House are always interesting. But let us now praise famous men. It was a privilege to propose you as Speaker in the 2015 Parliament. And now, in the reverse of Mark Antony in relation to Caesar, I come not to bury you, but to praise you. For that is the right thing to do when a period of long service comes to an end. And that is not to deny that there will be a debate about your term of office, as there are debates about the terms of office of other speakers in our history. However, I am very conscious of the good that men do is often interred with their end of service, and I think the good that you have done should be heralded, and that others at a later date will look at some of the criticisms that they may have, but now is not the occasion for that. In 2009, when you first addressed this House as a candidate for the speakership, you said that you did not want to be someone, but rather you wanted to do something. Your agenda was reform, renewal and revitalisation. And although I think the word modernisation is an expletive that I rarely allow to sound forth from my lips, there can be no denying that during your decade in office, you have worked tirelessly to achieve these objectives. As the 157th Speaker, you have been a distinctive servant of Parliament, both in this place and beyond, representing the House to audiences around the United Kingdom and overseas. And I think you share my conviction that politics is at its best when it is engaging. Your work with the United Kingdom Youth Parliament and your work with Parliament's excellent education team should be celebrated. So many schools from my constituency have taken advantage of this service, and I have always been impressed by the knowledge of the people involved. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that you had quite a battle to get the education building put up, and some people opposed you, but it has been a resounding success. During your speakership, it has been a time when our parliamentary democracy has been under intense scrutiny. We have been fortunate to have in the chair so accomplished a glottologist as you, in order that language, as well as the intricate and profound workings of Parliament, can be understood by everyone. I think the words chunter, mendicament, dilate, animadvert, and perhaps my favourite, susurrations, have been popularised under your speakership, and I imagine are now in common parlance in pubs and clubs across England, or at least in Boodles, the Beefsteak, Pratt's and the Garrick. But those sorts of clubs probably enjoy those words greatly. As you have dispensed your immediate duties from the chair, you have come to be known as the backbenchers' champion. Our main purpose as members of Parliament is to seek redress of grievance for our constituents, and you have been unswervingly diligent in your desire to ensure that all parliamentarians are treated equally, whether novice or hardened veteran. I cannot thank you enough for the help you gave to me to ensure that we could get the drug Brenuria for a constituent of mine, when within about a week you called me in oral questions, granted me an adjournment debate, and then gave me an urgent question, all of which helped build up pressure on the government to act, to the great advantage of a very ill and very young constituent of mine. This is my view of what Parliament is about, Mr. Speaker, and I think you facilitated that for me in a way that other speakers may well not have done, and my personal gratitude, and more importantly, the gratitude of the family who have benefited from that, is, I think, a real tribute to how you have operated. You have allowed parliamentarians to seek redress of grievance, and that is basically where our lawmaking in this place comes from historically. The ultimate, the most important, the highest duty of the Speaker of the House of Commons is to be the champion of our House and its members, and to defend our right to freedom of speech in defence of our constituents, and Mr. Speaker, you have done that. During your time, you have presided over what you yourself have termed the rumbustious Parliament. Now, as you step down from the office of Speaker of the House of Commons, having what is undoubtedly the highest honour that the House of Commons has in its power to bestow, I wish you a prosperous and successful retirement, and thank you and your family, Sally, Freddie, Jemima, and particularly the great Oliver, whom I know has more my view of modernisation than your own, at least with regard to wigs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Leader of the House for his statement? And I note that Business Questions isn't on this morning, but he did say that you'd allow us a bit of latitude. So could I ask one question through you, Mr. Speaker, and that is, when is the Parliament likely to return after the election? And perhaps he could answer that in his own time, whenever. But, Mr. Speaker, most people can read the basic facts about your life on your website, on various other websites. You're the first speaker since the Second World War to have served alongside 4 prime ministers and elected to the post 4 times. And I want to concentrate on my interactions with you. And those of us in the 2010 intake were pleased that the rules were suspended slightly. We were allowed to ask questions before we made our first speeches, and I think that made a huge difference to us. You spoke at and gave up a Saturday evening for the launch of the campaign to have a bust for Noor Inayat Khan, who was one of the special operations executive in Churchill's special group. Karen Newman sculpted that wonderful bust, which is now in Gordon Square. Noor was executed in the Dachau concentration camp, so it was important to recognise her. And you attended and spoke at and allowed me the use of a Speaker's House for the launch of the Sydney Goldberg competition. Sydney Goldberg was in the headquarters ship during the D-Day landings. And that's quite important, the use of Speaker's House, which you've opened up to civil society and charities. I think it's roughly 8 a week, over 150 a year, and that's really important for people to see what goes on in Speaker's House, and I'm sure many people will thank you for that, particularly as fielding a number of the questions as they walked through to the bed in the final room. We had to explain to them it wasn't you and Sally who slept there. Mr. Speaker, your friend since 1982, the Honourable Member for New Forest East, and you trained quite a lot of the Tory candidates, and I'm sure you've seen many of them here, and you've obviously trained them quite well because they've been quite argumentative towards you. But, Mr. Speaker, being in the chamber is what you have loved most, and I don't know, maybe they're going to patent your bladder. I mean, the sight of Ian and Peter checking your vital signs as you leave after a long session is quite interesting. But you've opened it up, as many people have said previously, to urgent questions. You knew which select committee we were sitting on, and you called people appropriately for urgent questions and statements. And I won't forget the phone call that you gave to me. I thought I'd done something wrong, actually. You picked up the phone and said, "Mr. Speaker here, would you like to come to Burma?" I think Joan Ruddock couldn't make it, and it was great to be on that trip with you, particularly as your groundbreaking speech at Yangon University before Daw Suu was elected. And we went to Mon State, and we went to the Legal Aid Clinic, and then a school, and there were people looking through windows with cameras, and they weren't actually following us. They were actually there, sent by someone else. But I remember you waving your hand and said, "Who are those people? Send them away." And they did go. They listened to you. But you are what the phrase is, behold the turtle. He only makes progress when he sticks his neck out. I think people will say you are a turtle on skids, because you commissioned the Good Parliament report by Dr. Sarah Childs, and many of her recommendations have now been implemented, particularly on proxy voting. There was the landmark report that you produced on speech, language and communication needs for children, and now ICANN, the children's charity, has done a follow-up report, Bercow 10 years on. And I hope it's made a difference, and they've seen the difference that your initial report has made. Of course, the Leader of the House has mentioned the Education Centre. Many of our schools have gone through that, and it's such a delight to walk through Speaker's Yard down to the Education Centre. It's made a huge difference to the understanding of Parliament. And I was privileged to also sit on your group for the Speaker's School Council Awards, and it was incredible to see children, the level of their entries, and how they were actually thinking about other people and how they want to change society. And so it's a tribute to you that that happened. And of course, the Youth Parliament in 2009, you've chaired every single Youth Parliament and you've been to every annual conference. And it was incredible to see the way the members of the Youth Parliament have risen to the occasion. And I'm sorry that you won't be here for the next one on the 8th. The level of debate, as you know, is absolutely exemplary and something that we can learn from. But it's UK Parliament Week next week, the 2nd to the 10th of November. As part of my business questions, I'm adding bits of information. 11,400 activities, 15 in Walsall South, 11 in North East Somerset. So you've got some catching up to do. But education at the other end, you are Chancellor of 2 universities, the University of Bedfordshire and your alma mater, University of Essex. And I know you will continue to teach them about how Parliament can be opened up. You've opened up Parliament and gave Parliament as part of the golden triangle, as I see it, of accountability with the executive and the judiciary. Parliament is not the subservient partner, but under your speakership, the equal and relevant partner. And I would say that to the other side, that I think you did do your job as a very impartial speaker, because I know that some of us on our side actually sort of questioned you calling other sides first. So everybody thinks that you are an impartial speaker and have favourites one way or the other. But you'll be pleased to know that your ratings on the Parliament channel has gone up, and the word order is now used by parents around the country as the new naughty step. But finally, I want to thank your long-serving staff, Peter Barrett and Ian Davis, and Jim Davey, and those are in the outer office and those in your inner office. They have always been absolutely exemplary to me and to other members, whether I was a backbencher or on the front bench. And of course, we can't forget the great Sally, who's always been by your side and supportive of the work that you do. And we all need that person who will support us in the work we do, and particularly Oliver, Freddie and Jemima. And it was lovely to watch them in the gallery yesterday as they were looking down, almost in tears, actually, some of them, and very nice for them to hear the tributes, because I know that they faced difficult time in the playground when you've been attacked. So, John Simon Bercow, this was your life in Parliament. We wish you well in whatever you choose to do, and you go with our grateful thanks and best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it's a statement, but...
The answer is the expectation is we come back on the Monday after the general election for swearing in.
Thank you. Sir Alan Duncan.
Mr. Speaker, may I really echo the heartfelt comments that have been made by you from so many quarters over the last few days. But in doing so myself and adding to them, may I do it by way of 2 confessions which I feel I've been needing to get off my chest. The first is that I was at a primary school, always there you get the difficult questions, and I was asked, what is the rudest thing that anyone has ever said to you in politics? And I thought for it a bit and said, you know what, it's when someone came up to me in the street and said, "Good morning, Mr. Bercow." I hope you will forgive me for that, as indeed the second confession is rather worse, and I may well burn in the fiery flames of hell for ever having done this, is that I am known occasionally in the tea room to have referred to you as Mr. Speaker Hobbit. I hope that you will forgive me this affectionate teasing, and in paying my own tributes to you, it gives me pleasure that my last words in this House are to wish you the best for the future.
Yes. I gently point out that a hobbit is a friendly creature. Thank you. Pete Wishart.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker, as I say that for the last time. And I was just saying to our Chief Whip here on the bench, given that, that questions were allowed to go for 40 minutes, Bercow must go. Mr. Speaker, I was, of course, one of your nominees 10 years ago, and I would therefore like to congratulate myself for my solid and sound judgment on that occasion. I always knew you'd make an excellent speaker, and even that awful impersonation you did of Peter Tapsell when you were trying to be elected didn't dissuade me of that notion at all. But I didn't know that you would be such a transformative speaker in that chair. The way we do business in this chamber is now forever changed because of your speakership. You have pioneered and you have transformed. The speakership in this House is now no longer just about overseeing the business in the chamber, the way that we debate and interact with each other. It's about asserting the rights of Parliament and champion parliamentary democracy. And you have been singularly brave in the way that you have challenged various governments who believe it's their gift to always get their way. And we'll never go back to these days now because of the way that you have challenged that assumption and the way that you've gone around that business. And I'll never forget sitting with you in that curry house in Buckingham when we in MP4 did a gig for you in your constituency, and how that curry house was stayed open because Mr. Speaker was coming here with some strange guests in a rock band, and the vindaloo that you ordered that night had to be specially prepared and kept open. We couldn't get you to come up on stage with us that evening, but now you've got a bit more time, you know, and with the Sinatra reference yesterday from the Prime Minister, maybe if you give us a rendition of My Way, and we'll happily supply the backing for that occasion. And I have to say that the culture in this House has been totally and radically transformed. You've ensured that backbenchers are now fully accommodated. I've been here long enough to remember the days when urgent questions and statements were cut off after half an hour and 40 minutes. And it would always be the backbenchers or those from the smaller parties that would lose out with an opportunity to say anything and give their point of view on that issue of the day. That no longer happens. Everybody is now accommodated. And I hope that as we go forward, that piece of transformation that you made will continue to be adopted. And it has changed the way that we all get an opportunity now to give our point of view in this House. It's important that that stays. And for that, we want to thank you. We on these benches will miss you, Mr. Speaker, and you will forever be a friend of Scotland and a friend of the Scottish National Party. So on behalf of our party, I want to wish you, your family, Sally, Freddie, Jemima and Oliver, all the very best for the future. Your staff, Peter and Ian and Jim, all the best too. I hope you enjoy the next stage of what has already been a fascinating and unique journey. You are a one officer, and we will miss you.
Here, here. Thank you. Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, a couple of days ago you commended me for brevity, so let me be brief. 2 weeks ago you were kind enough, or possibly unkind enough, to remind me that I was the longest serving member of the panel of chairmen. So may I, sir, on behalf of that panel, thank you for your guidance and wisdom over very many years of service. And I know that all of your friends on the panel wish you well and your family well in your retirement.
Thank you. I call the mother of the House, Harriet Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You're my fifth speaker now, and I can say from that experience that you have been a remarkable Speaker of this House. You have been a champion of Parliament, and you've been a reformer. As other honourable members and right honourable members have said, you've thought about opening up this House so that young people all around the country can see that it is their Parliament, that is there for them. You've set up the Education Centre, you've increased the number of children who've actually been able to come into this House and then watch it on TV, knowing they have walked on this green carpet, they've understood more, they've been more interested, and hopefully some will have the ambition to actually come here that might otherwise never have thought that was possible. And you've been a great champion of the Youth Parliament, but I would agree with the Leader of the House and the Shadow Leader of the House when they say that actually everybody agrees with that now, and everybody recognises that's a thoroughly good thing, but you had to fight for that because there were those who resisted change and said, we cannot have all these children here in the House of Commons, we've got work to be done. And you relentlessly and in a principled way pushed for it, and I thank you for that. You've also used the state rooms, the Speaker's state rooms, to give outside organisations a sense that their work is recognised by and valued in this Parliament. As the Shadow Leader said, over 1,000 organisations have come into this House, and the grandeur of that state rooms has inspired and encouraged them that their works in communities all around the country are valued here. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the work that you've done for the women's movement. Organisations campaigning for equal pay have been in those grand state rooms surrounded by those 20-foot-high portraits of former speakers. But they've had their place there, those championing equal pay, those complaining that we need more childcare, those who are campaigning against domestic violence. They have been there, and you have brought them in and endowed them with a sense of importance. You've actually turned one of the bars of the House of Commons into a nursery for the children of staff of Whitehall and in the House and members. And that too, that's something I think we can be proud of. Yeah. But that's something that you had to fight for, and I can say we had been fighting for it for decades and had failed. And it was not until you were in the chair that you made it happen. And you supported the coming into this chamber of 100 women MPs from 100 parliaments from all around the world, so that here in the mother of parliaments, we could validate their work in their parliaments all around the world. I think we can fairly say that you are politically correct, but it was not always the case. You started off as, you've been on what they describe as a political journey. You started off as towards the views of the Monday Club, and of then, I would say, I mean, you are woke now. You are woke now, but my goodness me, you were in the deepest of slumbers. But you know, you really have made a huge difference championing us here in the House. You've been, above all, you've been concerned about the role of Parliament being able to hold the executive to the account. And that's not just about backbenchers and frontbenchers. That's about the role of Parliament. You've made Parliament relevant. Members who've been more recently here perhaps wouldn't remember that, and I thank the Library for getting this information for me, is that in the 12 months before you took the Speaker's chair, there were 2 UQs granted in that whole 12 months. And the impact of that was that people outside the House would be discussing issues, but it would not be discussed here. And therefore, Parliament felt irrelevant. You, in your last 12 months, you granted 152 urgent questions. You have made Parliament relevant. And I thank you for that, but again, that has not always made you popular. Ministers would rather sit in their departments talking to civil servants and junior ministers who agree with them than come here and face the House. But it's better for government to be held to account. It's easy to make mistakes when you're doing things behind closed doors. You've always believed that the minority must have its say in Parliament, and you have championed that. But you've also always believed that the majority must have its way, and that is right. Precedent offers less help in what we have been experiencing in unprecedented times, but I think you've had a profound sense that you are accountable to the House and that you want to enable the House and facilitate the House, and that's what you've done. You leave the chair in uncertain and I would say even dangerous times. Thank you for your support and recognition for all those members who men as well as women, who just in going about their business have done so under a hail of threats of violence. Our democracy should not have to experience that. I'd like to thank you for being tireless in your work. I'd like to thank your family for their support of you. They can be rightly proud of what you've done, and we are too.
Thank you. Sir David Amos.
I'm very disappointed that I've not been able to put my question to the Leader of the House regarding lack of funding from the National Lottery for Southend West and the lousy ticket machines installed by CCTV, but we'll get over that. Mr Speaker, the House is at its best when we are being nice to each other. Colleagues, this will not last as we are about to embark upon this general election campaign. And Mr Speaker, you and I have known one another for a long time, and I cannot imagine how you and others who are leaving this place voluntarily must be feeling today. I wish each and every one of those colleagues every good fortune for the future. Now, you and I, Mr Speaker, have followed very different paths to this place. And it has not been easy for you being the Speaker, particularly in the light of the circumstances where you took that great office. But I think you have been a champion of backbenchers insofar as you have ensured that every voice is heard, particularly when you notice that that voice isn't always heard within their own political party. Now, you would be the first to say, Mr Speaker, that you couldn't have done the job so well without your magnificent backroom team of Peter, I'm not going to show favouritism, Ian and Jim. They've been absolutely wonderful. And I would just like to touch on, which the Mother of the House has already mentioned, a few other points. I know we're going to have tributes to the Reverend Rose, but she was an absolutely inspired choice. And for those of the Catholic brethren who were there in the crypt last night, it was particularly wonderful to hear her speak with my great pal, Father Pat Brown, who's just celebrated 10 years as a Catholic chaplain to the House. Mr Speaker, you have, among the things that you've done, you have made sure that it's worthwhile being on the order paper. Now, it took colleagues a little time to get the hang of it, but basically, if you were on the order paper, you gave everyone a chance to have their say. I also think, Mr Speaker, that you have done an absolutely magnificent job in promoting the work that you do throughout the country. And I end with these thoughts. On Monday, there is the election for a new Speaker, and a number of the contestants are in the chamber at the moment. Each and every one of them would do the job splendidly. I didn't seek to fill your shoes because those shoes would pinch. I do not have your control of the bladder, and I certainly do not have the photographic memory that you have. But if there is an opportunity for a slightly different role, I will certainly be a candidate for that. And my penultimate point is your family. You and Sally can look after yourselves. And it is a very, very tough job when you have children. And when my children were young, they didn't take kindly to the fact that not every member of the general public thought their father was wonderful. Now, your children have somehow got through all of that, and they are a credit to you and Sally. Of that there can be no doubt. So I wish you every future success, every happiness, and especially as your new role as a sports commentator.
Thank you. Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't intend to repeat the warm and generous tributes that have been paid to you and your speakership today, except to agree wholeheartedly with all of them. There have been some extremely good summaries of the particular flavour that you have brought to the speakership. You took over in very difficult times, right at the height of the controversies about expenses, when the House had a great deal of goodwill to regain from the public. You did so in a way which I think few would have expected, given where you began your political career. But the thing that I saw quickly and most about you, I think, was that you were, although you had a respect for tradition, you also had a very open mind about how it needed to change. And that was something that I referred to in my own maiden speech when I came into this House in 1992. It's a rare combination, particularly rarer, I suspect, coming from someone who began his life in the Federation of Conservative Students. But it was clear that you had not only the capacity, but the desire to go on a journey. And there were many of us who noticed your particular commitment to your principles as you grew into them when you resigned from the Conservative front bench because you objected to being whipped to vote against the equalisation of the age of consent. A nasty, nasty expectation for anyone in what was then a rapidly modernising social situation to be expected to do for their party. So the journey that you have taken on matters of equality has been noticed by all of those who were oppressed by not having access to it, and it's celebrated. Particularly the LGBT community owes you a great deal, and you have been an untiring and unfailing champion for women's rights, for the rights of those who have disabilities, and for LGBT and BAME people. And that commitment is shown in many of the decisions that you've taken in your executive role, and I was privileged to be able to serve with you on not the most glamorous of committees, the Speaker's committee behind the scenes, as you drove some of the modernisation that members on all sides of the House have pointed out that you've been responsible for in their tributes to you today. And the reactionary resistance that you've faced in driving that change for the Education Department to allow, for example, the Youth Parliament to sit here, has to be seen to be believed. Yeah. But you have driven, if I might say this, a coach and horses through that resistance and achieved real and lasting change, something that I think that when you are finally in your bath chair, and I know that will be for a very long time away from now, watching yet Roger Federer still winning the Veterans Trophy at Wimbledon, you will be able to sit back and reflect upon very much. And one final thing, there are a couple of other things. One, I've always loved your use of language and command of the House. You are never one that is content to say medicine when you can say medicament, or suitcase when you might say portmanteau. And I think that many of us have enjoyed that aspect of your time in the chair. And I think there's one place, Mr. Speaker, still far too hidebound by tradition, that needs your open and reforming zeal in order that we might deal with it. And this is a question I have for the Leader of the House. Why on earth doesn't the Right Honourable Gentleman get up now and say that he recognises the absolute ability to drive change in fusty-dusty organisations that Mr. Speaker has shown, and send him where he belongs, to the House of Lords?
Thank you. The Leader's made his contribution.
Mr. Speaker, I think this has changed from a statement into a succession of speeches, and it would be tiresome for the House if I popped up every other moment.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to add my congratulations to you on what I think has been a fantastic tenure as Speaker at probably one of the most turbulent, difficult times this House and this Parliament has seen. I would echo all the points that have been made about others, by others in relation to how you've reformed how this House works and also the causes you've championed. Our relationship has changed over the years. At times I've been a backbencher raising questions, other times I've been a shadow minister, I've been a minister and a Secretary of State, all whilst you sat in that chair and adjudicated over our proceedings. And I can honestly say the approach that, Mr. Speaker, you've taken to parliamentary matters and in particular urgent questions allowing members to raise their issues with government ministers and departments, in my personal experience, has always been unfailingly fair. Whenever a department has been genuinely getting on with an issue and absolutely has had a good case to make for this question not being urgent, you have absolutely looked at that point and I think processed it fairly. But from my perspective, having been a minister for many years, I never had any issues with how you made that decision and actually welcomed the chance for my department and my ministerial team to be held to account by this chamber, because my view was it made us behave more appropriately and up our game, frankly, which is exactly what it's meant to do. I wanted to briefly mention one final thing which hasn't been highlighted in this place, which is the Speaker's Placement Scheme, which has enabled this House to become accessible to a range of young people from very different backgrounds, perhaps to the more traditional cohort of MPs and employees that we've seen in this House. Like a number of members in the House, I've had 2 Speaker placement candidates in my office over the last 2 years. They've both been absolutely outstanding. And not only have I hope they learnt from the chance to be on the scheme that you set up, Mr. Speaker, but certainly my office and my team and myself have learnt and grown from having them part of our team as well. I think the chance to open up Parliament to a new generation of young people who just simply otherwise would not get a chance to come here and realise that it's everybody's Parliament, I think is one of the most powerful steps you've taken, and I very much hope that not only your successor will continue it, but they will look at how it can be expanded so that young people from all over the country and for many more MPs can get the chance to experience that wonderful, wonderful Speaker Placement Scheme. I think you've been a parliamentary referee during perhaps the toughest game that we've been playing here for many, many years. I'm sure that has taken its toll both on you and your family, but I think the support that you've had from them has been amazing, and can I just simply wish you well in the next phase of your life. And no doubt, as I also leave this House, perhaps our paths will cross, but in different capacities.
Thank you. And Tom Brake. Tom Brake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I start perhaps in a slightly different place than others in terms of thanking you for the support that you've given me on the House Commons Commission. I think it's probably fair to say that we haven't necessarily seen eye to eye on every matter that's been raised there, but certainly I'm sure that both of us would want to thank the staff who've supported you, and also I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the civil servants who supported me. I have no idea whether I will be back here again seeking their support again, or indeed would be in my position as House of Commons Commission spokesman in this place, but certainly they do sterling work for us and support us very effectively. I want to start, as others have done, by thanking your family. Now, we all know as politicians that our families are often in the front line. They don't see enough of us, and when they do, it's not exactly quality time they get with us. So I hope that you will spend very valuable time with them in the future, and certainly I will remember as one of the highlights of being in this place attending one of the events that you organised in the Speaker's House and having your children come in to kiss Daddy goodnight. And so that is something I remember and do use very often as an anecdote, I must say, when I'm doing my best to entertain people. Now, I want to commend you for your commitment to modernising this place. Now, many people have referred to some of the initiatives that you have spearheaded, whether it's proxy voting, youth parliament, the education service, or indeed the much greater frequency with which urgent questions are heard in this place. I'd also like to commend you for improving the diversity amongst staff and making the House of Commons a place where hopefully anyone will feel comfortable working, including, of course, our excellent chaplain, Rose, who serves us so well. As one of the Commission members, I also want to draw attention to the work that you've done in pushing through the Restoration and Renewal project. That is something that does need to move forward. The mother of all parliaments is in real risk of simply collapsing around our ears, and the role that you played in making sure that that proceeds, I think, is something that will certainly rest as a legacy, one of your legacies in this place. But finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, I'd like to commend you for ensuring that this Parliament isn't an encumbrance to be trampled upon, but a sovereign Parliament, proud and resolute in standing up for the rights of our constituents and the people of the United Kingdom. And from the Liberal Democrat benches, I wish you a very bright and positive future. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the right honourable gentleman very warmly for that. We've worked together for a long time. I will come to the honourable gentleman. Of course so. Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for calling me for once quite early on in the proceedings and not saving the good doctor for tail-end Charlie. One of the disadvantages, it must be said, of having originally met you 15 years before we both entered the House in 1997 was the fact that you have, from time to time, felt it incumbent upon yourself to demonstrate that you were showing no particular favouritism to a personal friend by calling me perhaps as early as I would like to have been called. I would like to say that I was impressed by the fact that the shadow leader of the House referred to our 10-year period training up Conservative activists, I think about 600 in all, before we entered the House of Commons together in 1997. And at that time, I used to do the campaigning part of the course, and you used to do the oratorical part of the course. And you used to say that in a good speech, the speaker should have at best one key point and at most two key points to convey to the audience. So my one key point about you, your character and your speakership is that you have shown that you are a good man to have by one's side when the going gets rough. And that doesn't just apply to individuals, it applied to Parliament as a whole, because when you came into office in 2009, the going was very rough indeed. Now, of course, you made that entry into Parliament in a somewhat dramatic way as MP for Buckingham, because such were your skills as an orator during the selection process that you had been shortlisted for not only Buckingham, but Surrey Heath constituency, and you were due to be in the semi-final in Surrey Heath and in the final in Buckingham on the same night. And you will recall that, at my suggestion, we organised a helicopter to enable you to go from one interview to the other so that you would not have to withdraw. And I know that you have felt for many years a great deal of gratitude towards me for making that possible. I have to tell you that that gratitude was entirely misplaced, because I knew that only a few days later, the process for selecting for New Forest East was going to begin. and we were both on the long list for New Forest East, and I thought to myself, if I can't get this blighter selected, I'm not going to have a chance. So it worked out as a win-win situation. Now, it has often been remarked, and it has been remarked again today, that you went on a political journey. But I have to say that the detail of that political journey has not always been spelled out quite as clearly as it should be. There's this myth out there that the young Bercow was part of the Monday Club, he had very right-wing views, and then he saw the light and he repudiated them all. And so it's with great pleasure that I remind the House that on the 2nd of December 1997, when we had both been elected to this House, and there was a debate on the second reading of the Treaty of Amsterdam, and I was making only my 4th speech from the benches of the House of Commons, you, chuntering from a sedentary position, kept heckling me on why it was I was such a Johnny-come-lately to the cause of ardent Euroscepticism. some people may wish that some journeys had been rather shorter than in fact they turned out to be. I won't detain the House at all longer, other than to make a couple of closing points. One is that I'm still waiting for the dinner which I earned in a bet with a young female Conservative MP, now a minister, I'm delighted to say, when she bet me that you would not last 1 year as Speaker without being ejected. And secondly, I would like to observe that now, finally, at last, you will, freed from the constraints of the speakership, will feel able to speak your mind and not hold back your views so self-effacingly. On a more serious note, but a heartfelt one, as well as thanking you for your personal friendship over many years, I'm sure you will agree with me that it would be nice to close this tribute to you with a personal tribute I would like to make to the Right Honourable Lady for Cunnan Valley, who has been here for 35 years and in all that time has never ceased promoting human rights at home and abroad. And from the opposite side of the chamber, I would like to salute her as I salute you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. Thank you. I completely endorse what the Right Honourable Gentleman just said about the Right Honourable Lady, who has been fearless, principled and insistent on speaking up for the rights of people around the world when those rights have been egregiously abused. If ever there has been in this Parliament a voice for the voiceless, the Right Honourable Lady has been that voice. Mr. Barry Shearman.
I want to start on a personal note. You know, I met you before you were a Member of Parliament, and I can remember what an irritating young man you were at that time. You were clever, I knew it, and a bit arrogant with it, and wanted to tell me just how right you were on every political issue. This is before you were in Parliament. Over the years, I've got to know and like you a great deal, and I hope I can count you as a friend. You actually like my ties, which is something that recommends me. I remember when I chaired the Education Select Committee, you asked me to come to your constituency. Then much later, you asked if you could come to Huddersfield to see what sort of constituency I represented, and I've told the House this before. You know, I met you at Wakefield Station, you got off the train and you said, it's a hell of a long way, isn't it? And of course it is nearly 200 miles to Huddersfield. But we had a fantastic day together, And I think you learned a great deal about, and it was, I think, that sort of thing, going to people's constituencies, finding out what it was really like, and even actually learning the journey that we all have to take, and the vulnerability when members of Parliament are travelling. I think you woke up to that very much that day, and you've been such a good influence like that. And remember, this was just after Joe Cox's murder, and it was actually the very day after the referendum, so it was an auspicious occasion that we can remember. I do remember a very more personal one. You know, I have a very large family, 3 daughters, a son and 12 grandchildren, and a few years ago, what do we do on Boxing Day? We're all down in London for a big reunion. What do we do on Boxing Day? We thought we'd go to London Zoo, and of course, the favourite thing to go was the penguin pool. And who do I find at the penguin pool? The Speaker, his wife, and their children. And, you know, that was a touch of, you know, the Speaker, as we all know, a great family person, and we love the fact that he and Sally have been, you know, living here with their family, and the kids actually seem to have grown up really wonderfully, even in this strange and environment. So my congratulations, Mr. Speaker, about all that. You're very easy to get on with. You're a very good friend, so I'm thinking I can have the privilege of give you some careers advice. I give a lot of careers advice. It's one of the things I'm told that I'm quite good at, and try to help people identifying their talent and moving them on a bit. What's surprising me about you, Mr. Speaker, when you became, I didn't realise you were actually a very good manager. And this place, the dark days before you became Speaker, just needed management. And what you did in terms of the team you put around, your personal team, the great team of people you've got now, but from those early days, and it wasn't easy, making change in a place that was desperately badly managed. And only because, you know, we'd inherited such a crazy system. And you came in, you could see that, and you have turned the management of this place, you've transformed it. And I think in the days to come, we'll look back on this period, the Bercow years, as really great years for Parliament. Not only it's more efficient and more sensitive to all those things in terms of families and children and women and diversity, all that, you'll be remembered for that. But you will also remember the fact you've brought this place back to life. It was in dreadful trouble. If you go back and see what it was like, we were in deep trouble. And you helped to save it, and you led that saving process. And I have to say only one thing that I said earlier today, and I want to say it because it has to be said, that what you went through at a certain stage in your career, in terms of how the press treated you, and as I said earlier, not just the red tops, but the Times, the Daily Telegraph, you know, people that, some of them who used to be MPs writing about you, sketch writers used to be funny. Yeah? Political sketch writing used to be funny. Not some of the sketch writers that hounded you, Mr. Speaker. And the fact of the matter is we know who they were, but we also know they stimulated on social media some ghastly stuff that you had to, and the family had to put up with. And I'm proud that you stood up to it, it didn't get you down, and you are still here today and as a robust champion of everything you did. The careers advice comes now. You're very young. Now, I'm hoping to be re-elected as a member for Huddersfield, and I will be, if I'm successful, I will miss you. But I think you're only, mid-50s. Mid-50s, just the time to start a brilliant new career. And I don't talk about Frank Sinatra and all that sort of, his voice had gone by the time he started all those right, although I loved his voice. The fact of the matter is you are in the prime of your life. And I see you making a much better and greater contribution than you've done, even up to now. Now, personally, and I say this to the Leader of the House, I think it would be an absolute insult to this House if the tradition that the Speaker is offered a seat in the House of Lords. If some pettiness, and I say to the Speaker, I got very worried this week when the Prime Minister failed to pay a warm tribute to the father of the House. I hope that kind of pettiness will not go to a rebuke and a repudiation of a long tradition that our Speaker, when he retires from this place, is offered a place in the House of Lords. But can I say, even if that happened, Mr. Speaker, your talent, even the talent you have of mimicry, your voices, all that stuff. I was talking to ABC television yesterday that phoned me and said, your Speaker, would he be interested in doing a programme in America? We love him in America. And I said, no, we want him to have a brand new television programme about politics called Order, Order. So, Mr. Speaker, I want you to stay in politics, do a really good job on the media, and bring that to life in the way that you've brought this place to life. But whatever you decide, Godspeed.
Well, I'm extraordinarily grateful to the honourable gentleman. I am conscious that these exchanges have become very lengthy, and there is other business with which the House has to deal. That's not a criticism of anybody. People have spoken genuinely from the heart, and I appreciate that. But if we are to accommodate colleagues and then get on to the very important business of tributes to the Reverend Rose, which must happen, and in the most fulsome terms, then perhaps a little bit of self-discipline would assist us. Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will be aware that it was recently announced that we are being given a new hospital in Harlow, one of 6 to be built in the early stages in the country. The reason why I mention it is because much of that is down to you. You gave me 5 debates. You allowed me to ask questions. You helped me when I came to you to say that this was a very important issue in my constituency. And that example, which is recent, is one of many throughout my time in the House since 2010. And what is not known in the media is how often you help MPs who have real constituency issues make their case to the government. And I think the Leader of the House mentioned that. And you have been unfailingly kind to me, unfailingly helpful whenever I needed to support the people of my constituency. And whatever may happen at the general election, it is actually the things I have been able to do, much of it has been down to you, and the people of Harlow owe you a debt for what you have enabled me to do in my role as MP. And I thank you for your constant kindness to me over the last few years, and I will never forget it, and I wish you every possible success in the future.
Well, extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable gentleman. Anne Clwyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All I can say, I don't use many words, but I want to say to you, I can't imagine this place without you. And I've been here a very long time now, as my honourable friends for New Forest East and Huddersfield know. From Huddersfield, he gave me the opportunity when it was very difficult for women to get into politics. He helped me become the MEP for Mid and West Wales, and I thank him for that. And my friend from New Forest, we've disagreed, particularly on defence matters over the years, but I still look on him as a friend. And as for you, Mr. Speaker, well, the BBC apparently has got a particular tribute to you. They first talk about your catchphrase, the traditional cry of common speakers through the centuries, order, order, often elongated and twisted into an extraordinary sound that is all his own. And to mark his retirement, the BBC has analysed 100 years of Hansard, the official parliamentary record, to discover just how different he was to any previous occupant of the chair. And the first thing we discover is that he has said order nearly 14,000 times, wow. Which I think must be a record. But that is just the beginning of the Bercow story in statistics. But I want to thank you in particular, Mr. Speaker. Those of us who are older in this place, and there is a place for older people in this Parliament, sometimes are not able to jump to their feet quite as fast as they used to when they first came here 35 years ago. And I'm grateful that when I had a new knee, you allowed me to sit down and still get in on questions. And thank you for that. And thank you for understanding people's weaknesses and strengths in this place. And I feel, having sat here under, I can't count how many speakers now, but going back to 1984, quite a number. And you, Mr. Speaker, in my view, have been the best, because you've given us the opportunity, backbenchers in particular, the opportunity to get in on questions, urgent questions, statements, and all the rest. At times you've, even though you usually wear a red coat, sometimes it's been difficult to catch your eye, but I quite understand that. But I really feel very grateful to you for opening up this Parliament, as many as my honourable friends have mentioned, to everybody. Particularly the Speaker's House, people from outside have come here and have been amazed how accessible you've been to the public, and particularly nice to children. My nieces and nephews wrote to you after being here. They particularly wanted to know what you had for breakfast, because you must have had some conversation with them about food. They were very young, but they kept asking me that question. I said, why don't you write and ask him? And I think they got an answer as well. So thank you for everything. Thank you for being such a good human being. And I hope, because you were very active before you were the Speaker, particularly on human rights yourself. And I hope you will continue to be the voice for people who need your help all over the world. And I'm sure you will be, because it is your natural instinct. So, diolch yn fawr, Llefarydd. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welsh is my first language. I took my spoke my first few words here in Welsh. Thank you very much from all of us. And I won't say happy retirement. I don't like the word retirement, because those of us who want to keep on talking will, I'm sure, use the opportunity to keep on talking at every opportunity.
Thank you. Sir Christopher Chope. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, and can I, in so doing, thank her for her exemplary public service over so many years. The Honourable Gentleman Member for Huddersfield referred to career advice, and I can remember, Mr. Speaker, you asked me once at one of these meetings of potential Conservative candidates whether I could give you some advice as to how you might become a proper parliamentary candidate selected in a constituency. And the advice I gave you, which you followed, was that you should get married. And that just reminds us, doesn't it, of how times have changed. But you and I have been friends for many, many years. And I had the privilege of nominating you for the Conservative Party candidates list at a time when our views were very similar. Indeed, one of your qualifications then, I think, was that you regarded, like I did, Enoch Powell as a schoolboy hero. And I think that you, in more recent weeks, you have been following the advice that Enoch gave, and I had the privilege of serving with him on the committee of. Yes, back in 1984, this was, Enoch Powell was on the Procedure Committee, and he gave advice to us that in the absence of a written constitution, the procedures of the House are our constitution. And I think that's something that you've taken very much to heart over recent weeks and months, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that nothing that has happened in that period will cause pressures to build for a written constitution, because that would deprive us of those flexibilities. But can I also say that you've obviously been a really good servant for backbenchers, and you've also always had your finger on the pulse. And I just give one example of that, that is back in 2010, after the coalition government had been elected and there'd been an announcement the government was going to bring in a measure which hadn't been in the manifestos of either of the two coalition parties, namely to change the prerogative powers of the Prime Minister to call a general election. You, with your finger on the pulse, chose me to have the first adjournment debate of that Parliament on the subject of the dissolution of Parliament. That was an opportunity, I think it went on for about an hour and a half, an opportunity for new members and old to be able to hold the government to account for its extraordinary announcement, which at that stage was for a threshold of 55% in order to be able to trigger an election. We asked questions like, what 55% of what, etc., etc. But I think on that occasion, Mr. Speaker, you showed your perspicacity as to the issues which were going to be and still are indeed important. One other thing, you were fantastic when we had the presidency of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. You went out of your way to impress our colleagues across the other 46 countries that belongs to the Parliamentary Assembly. And then you stood up for those of us in this House who found ourselves being arbitrarily removed from membership of the Parliamentary Assembly because we'd had the temerity to vote against the government's attempt to try and rig the referendum by suspending the rules of purdah. Your intervention on that actually caused the government to be put into the naughty corner, and as a result, a few years later, those of us who had been removed from the Parliamentary Assembly were reinstated on it. So I thank you also for that and for your fantastic service to this place and to democracy over so many years.
Thank you. I really appreciate what the honourable gentleman has said. We have known each other for 35 years, and I richly appreciate his words. Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the leaders should be so shy today.
No, you shouldn't.
He is an innovator. We've now had a statement which has become a debate. This has never happened before in the history of Parliament. So he is a great innovator, and we look forward to his many more innovations. I want to pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Cunnan Valley. Tony Blair never managed to say it correctly. It was always Cynon Valley, according to him. Cunnan Valley. I first met her on a trip long before I was a member of Parliament. She already was a doughty figure in the Labour movement when we went to Chile many years ago, and she, as many members have said, has stood up for human rights and, for that matter, sat down for human rights in Tower Colliery. And I know her constituents, and my constituents too, for that matter, in the Rhondda, have a great deal of respect for her. As for you, Mr. Speaker, I hope you remember Tom Harris. Tom was not the most left-wing of Labour MPs, and indeed, on one occasion in the tea room, I said to him, he was trying to say that he was a lefty, and I said, Tom, the only vaguely left-wing thing about you is that you quite like the gays. Which he decided he would have on his tombstone one day. I have it's not often that I speak solely about the LGBT issue, but I think it's been an essential part of your journey. Yeah. And I mean, there have been occasions when Speaker's House has felt a bit like a gay bar, night after night after night, which is great. It's wonderful because actually change has come so quickly in this country, yes, and acceptance and diversity, and you have played a very important part in that. Indeed, the main reason I wanted to speak is I wanted to say a very specific thank you, which is that as honourable members would know, for centuries, members of Parliament and their very close relatives have been allowed to get married in St Mary's Undercroft. And that's been something that many have taken advantage of and has been a great delight to them. That was never available, of course, to gay MPs, and still isn't because of the rules of the Church of England, which I fully understand, though I did have to persuade the former Bishop of Oxford, Richard Harries, that he couldn't marry me, A, because canon law didn't allow it, and B, because the law of the land didn't allow it. When it was mooted that we should be able to find somewhere in the Palace of Westminster where gay and lesbian MPs should be able to form their civil partnership. You were the first person who leapt forward and said that you would do everything in your power to try and make this happen. Now, I know this to be the case because you rang Chris Mullin and asked him what he thought about this. Now, Chris Mullin, I think, has always been a very liberal-minded chap, always in favour of the, the modern world and diversity and so on, and was very friendly to me and to my partner, Jared Cranny. But I happen to know, because it's in his published diaries, that he said that he thought that civil partnerships in the Palace of Westminster would be a step too far at this time. But you ploughed on. We made sure, and what was particularly nice about this was that in opening it up to allowing civil partnerships in the Palace, it also meant that any member of the public could perform a civil partnership in the Palace. And we made that possible now for several hundreds, I understand, of people who have now got married in the Palace, and that's a great delight. I particularly remember Harriet, if you don't mind me calling her Harriet, the mother of the house, chatting to Cilla Black and Sally and Pat Brunker and lots of other women from the Rhondda Labour Party with copious quantities of champagne and enjoying themselves enormously. And we were the first civil partnership in Parliament, and that's entirely down to you.
It was. It was.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I think it was on the Saturday, the 27th of March 2010. I remember it extremely well. And it was a very happy occasion. It brought no harm to anyone, but it brought much happiness. Yes, indeed, colleagues. Mr. Philip Davis.
Much, Mr. Speaker. As you know, I didn't vote for you to be the Speaker when you were elected in 2009. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you'll recall that I spent about an hour with you, sat down at a table over a cup of tea, explaining all the reasons why I wasn't going to vote for you to be Speaker. I think it's also fair to say, Mr. Speaker, that we've had our disagreements, particularly on the decisions you've made over Brexit in recent times. And we've I don't think that'll come as a great shock to anybody either in the House or outside of the House, but we've always conducted those conversations in perfectly civil terms, as I think you would accept. But I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, you've always been immensely kind to me in my time in the House of Commons, not least during our preparations for our wedding, mine and Esther's wedding next year, over which you've been especially kind. And I must at this point pay tribute to Rose, which was an inspired appointment by you, and has equally been amazingly kind to both me and Esther, and is so kind that she's even offered to come back to conduct the service for us even after she's left, which is a mark of her and something that is very special for both me and Esther. We're very privileged that that's been the case. But that was an inspired appointment by you, Mr. Speaker, and you've been incredibly kind. But the thing I think that you will be most remembered for, and I hope you'll be most remembered for, is your support for people on the backbenchers. And as you know, I'm a permanent backbencher, Mr. Speaker, so this is more important to me than anybody else. As I always say, the one thing that me and the Prime Minister always agree about is that I should be on the backbenchers. And you have always been a champion of people on the backbenchers, to allow everybody's opinion, whatever it is, to be heard in the chamber, and I've always been immensely grateful for that. I remember when I first entered Parliament in 2005, and some people have very short memories, but I remember on question time we barely got beyond question 6 or 7 on the order paper. Prime Minister's questions, if you were past question number 10, you had no chance of being called, to much irritation to many colleagues who had spent ages trying to get on the order paper for Prime Minister's questions, and then found that they couldn't even get to ask the question. And now, I don't think anyone could possibly go back to that kind of regime. And I don't think any speaker would, the House wouldn't allow any speaker to go back to that regime. And it's because of you making sure that backbenchers got to have their say that has made what I think will be a permanent change to the way that this House operates. I've been very grateful for your friendship over many years, the fact that you came to my constituency and spoke at Beckford School, which they particularly cherished. I hope we'll stay in touch after you finish in your term, Mr. Speaker, and I wish you every success for the future.
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he and I will continue to have curry together. I think we can be sure about that. Seema Malhotra.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I take this opportunity to put on record my thanks to you and my appreciation for all your guidance and support since the day that I was elected. Mr. Speaker, you are an extraordinary parliamentarian, human being and friend to so many, and I extend that also to your family, who deserve our thanks. Mr. Speaker, your welcome to new MPs, I know, goes a long way to settling them in this House at a very, very daunting time for them when everything is so confusing. I know for me, it went a long way to giving me the confidence to step up in this House and to do my duty on behalf of my constituents, and I thank you for that. May I also say a thank you, to Mr. Speaker, to you on behalf of my family. My brother Sandeep in Australia has just texted me to say that he also wants to extend his best wishes and his thanks to you, particularly for your support when we were going through extremely difficult times, notably the illness and death of my father. You were accommodating when I had to leave before debate ended. You came to our last family tea downstairs, and your letter to my father wishing him good health was a huge boost to his spirits in his final months. Mr. Speaker, your commitment to equality and well-being has been second to none in this House. And I know how much you have done. It has indeed been an honour to serve on your Speaker's committees on equality, diversion and inclusion since very soon after I was elected, and I am grateful to the opportunity for having done so. You've done incredible work, often behind the scenes, on achieving a proxy vote for colleagues that are benefiting from that now in this House. You've been committed to increasing diversity in senior and significant positions in this House. And the visibility of that diversity in senior positions has gone a long way to making this House feel more relevant and inclusive, not just to us here, but to those outside. This is a statement.
It's a strange.
Odd statement.
I'm not sure whether I'm giving way or not, but I'll carry on now. Your work in the Education Centre as well has been extraordinary. You are an agent of change, and you set a standard for how to push the boundaries for reform and revitalisation, needed desperately, no matter what the organisation. So I want to thank you also on behalf of my constituents, because I know that hundreds, and if not thousands, have been through, particularly the Education Centre, young people, often at primary school age, who have been able to experience the House and to build a connection, which is a place that is their house and which is fighting for their future too. And I have no doubt that there are future parliamentarians and indeed future speakers who will be coming into their roles in public life as a result of their experience from our fantastic Education Centre and all those who work in it. You have opened up Speaker's House, where we have held events like Vaisakhi, Sikh Awareness and History Month, and indeed you hosted the first anniversary of a new project in Hounslow, Hounslows Promise, seeking to advance the education attainment, social mobility and employability of our young people. Mr. Speaker, I also pay tribute to you for your defence of this House and our democracy. This is a House that is a beacon of democracy across the world. Its integrity, its reputation as a national institution goes beyond us as individuals and must never be taken for granted. It is indeed for each of us to protect and safeguard this House, because it is our democracy that keeps our nations safe. And Mr. Speaker, you have led us through unbearable times, like the events that have stunned the nation, the terror attack on Parliament, and the murder of our dear friend Jo Cox. Seeing also through the unconventional but extremely important and peaceful unveiling on a Saturday of her coat of arms here behind us by her husband and her children. I was honoured to be here that day, along with local councillors, Councillor Adriana Georgia, Councillor Candice Atherton and Councillor Samia Chowdhury and others who came to support the family at that time and to remember Jo. Mr. Speaker, in the Chamber, you have been tough and fair when needed, whether that's with the front bench or the back bench. But you have also been generous when needed, such as when there have been urgent constituency matters, including events like the life and then the death of young Charlie Gard from my constituency, or indeed on policy matters like the issues for young offenders in Feltham Young Offenders Institute. You have allowed us to raise those issues at moments of great importance, and I am grateful to you, as my constituents are, when that has made the difference. Mr. Speaker, you have touched the lives of hundreds of thousands who have walked through the doors of this place. You are loved by many across this House, political friend and foe alike, and you will be deeply missed. I know, however, that this will not be the end of a sterling career, and that whatever you do next will be a great contribution to our democracy and to our country. And I'm excited, as well as intrigued, as to what it might be.
Thank you. Mr. Richard Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, you have been given careers advice today by people rather more experienced than me, particularly the member for Huddersfield. But I've been thinking a lot about this, and I would like to. I thought, Mr. Speaker, the obvious. At first, I thought, well, maybe you could be the next host of the Radio 4 programme Just a Minute. But then, of course, can you imagine, with your experience, no deviation, hesitation, or repetition? No chance. But I then thought of a programme of my childhood, which older members here may know. Certainly, I think you may, and indeed the Leader of the House. And that is a remake of the programme Call My Bluff. Because I do think, Mr. Speaker, you could indeed be the Frank Muir character, for those that remember it. For the younger members of the House, the programme was actually, panellists would mention words in English that most of the people listening had no idea what they meant, and they had to indeed accept which of the panellists, their version of it was true. Chunter being a very good, now you've made that into a household name. It's a verb, an adverb, a noun, and almost anything. But I think the Frank Muir character, Mr. Speaker, would be you. And you're, for me, having you being this only person to be Speaker all the time I have been here, for me, you've been a very fair, very decent and very honourable Speaker. And the nonsense you put up with, and both here, in the press and everywhere else, it does you credit to the fact that you've seen your way through all of that. But your system, Mr. Speaker, is based on what my children and my former employees call my system, which was parenting and management by sarcasm. Something of which I do feel you should be very proud, because you have taken it to new bounds. Sarcasm as a form of controlling 650 people and my children and indeed my former employees. But finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say fans everywhere. My mother has a large photograph of you and her on her mantelpiece at home. I'm continually compared. Why can't you be like John Bercow? And also Miss Harriet Rainbow in my office, the doyen of the Watford Parliamentary office, big fan as well. Mr. Speaker, every time I've stood up, I say thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to finish by saying thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable gentleman's extraordinarily generous. But the honourable gentleman, as well as being a very diligent member of Parliament, talks about his employees. He's employed a lot of people over the years, and his mum knows very well. Before he came into this House, he was an extremely successful business person, something I've never been. Lots of things I've never been, but I've never been a successful business person. But I want to thank the honourable gentleman for what he said and for the way in which he has said it. And Mr. Ian Mearns.
For the very last time, I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. It has been a real pleasure to work under your speakership for the last 9.5 years. And my honourable friend, the right honourable friend, the member for Cunnan Valley, to a certain extent stole a little piece of my thunder, and that was the fact that the BBC this morning were reporting that you would use the phrase order, order on no fewer than just under 14,000 times. Now, I'm just thinking, maybe you're fortunate in one way of having nearly achieved that 14,000 record, because you might not have achieved that had we been living through less interesting political times. And I think, you know, the interesting political times that we're living through were kind of exemplified 2 Saturdays ago, and we, in this chamber, in here, assembled to say prayers, and your chaplain used the word "be not anxious," and a giggle, a nervous giggle, ran around the house. And I just thought to me it was a sort of moment to treasure, but also a moment which captured the mood of this House and the mood of the country about the political position that we are currently in. Mr. Speaker, you've been a true champion of backbenchers for the entire duration of my tenure in this House, which is 9.5 years. And for 9 of those years, I've served as a member of the Backbench Business Committee, and for the last 4.5 years as chair of that committee. And, sir, you have been a champion not just of backbenchers, but of the role of the Backbench Business Committee, which came into being when I first entered this House. The Backbench Business Committee have, through your speakership, been allowed members across this House to air issues of vital importance to their constituents across the whole of this United Kingdom. And you have been a true champion of their capacity and their ability to do so. You've allowed us as backbenchers to hold the executive to account, and on behalf of my sister, my eldest sister, Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I think we had a little lesson about that in a curry house not too far away from this very establishment. Mr. Speaker, it's been a pleasure to work under your speakership, and can I wish you a very long and happy next stage of your career.
Sir Henry Bellingham.
Can I just ask your indulgence, because I have to go and chair a debate in Westminster Hall, and I just wanted to pay an initial tribute to the Speaker's chaplain, because Bishop Rose has been an inspiration to all of us. And one of the great joys of having an early question on the order paper is to come into prayers and hear the uplifting, spiritual and holy Christian way in which she conducts those prayers. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I came back into the House in 2001, after a short absence, courtesy of an ungrateful electorate, you and I became friends. In fact, we always happened to sit quite near each other. It was the third row back, quite near where the right honourable member for Huddersfield sits. And you always gave me good advice. I mean, I'd been in the House for a few years before that, but the House had changed a great deal. And at that stage, I think you were, at different times, Shadow Chief Secretary for Treasury and Shadow Secretary of State for DFID. And we had very interesting discussions. In fact, you were robust. You made me look like an old-fashioned Tory wet and a moderniser. But you also, Mr. Speaker, taught me something else, because you were, when you tried to catch the Speaker's eye, when you jumped up, you had a habit of, I won't demonstrate it now, but you had a habit of giving the back of the bench in front a very, very loud kick, a firm kick. And it always worked, because Speaker Martin would look up and he'd see you and he'd call you. And on one occasion, I was trying to get called,
And you, in fact, were sitting next to me, not trying to get called. And I started kicking the bench in front. And Speaker Martin then called you, even though you weren't standing. But, Mr. Speaker...
One of the few people he knew.
Well, that certainly is not a fault with this Speaker, because his extraordinary memory and recollection of every single name and every single detail regarding every colleague is beyond extraordinary. But, Mr. Speaker, I've spent the last fortnight or so on the Speaker election at Hustings, and we haven't agreed on everything, but one thing we have agreed on, all 9 of us, is that you have done the most superb job for backbenchers. Through the UQ revolution, through backbench debates, and through calling colleagues when you know they have a particular constituency interest. We also agree that what you've done in terms of outreach for children and for schools has been transformational. I can testify to the fact that in the past, when school parties came down from Norfolk, they would meet me in Central Lobby, we would struggle to find a committee room, there was nowhere to go and have a cup of coffee. Now they can go to the Jubilee Cafe, they can go to the new education centre, and it is a completely different experience thanks to you. And you have made the lives of those children much more fulfilling in terms of our understanding of democracy than was ever the case before. And I just want to also make the point as well that and I do agree entirely with the Leader of the House, you look out for those colleagues who've got individual constituency cases where there might be a problem, there might be a real issue, and you come to the rescue of those colleagues and you help them get justice and some form of satisfaction for their constituents. And along with the Honourable Member for Gateshead, we were both on the HS2 Select Committee, and during that inquiry we spent a lot of time along the route of HS2, including a number of days in your constituency, Mr. Speaker. And we had a number of meetings with communities, with villages, with action groups, with residents. And one of the things that struck me, and I'm sure it also struck the Honourable Member for Gateshead, was whenever you arrived at a meeting of distraught residents, you not only knew the names of every single one of them in the village, you absolutely knew everything there was to know about that village, and you were a local MP on their side, admired and respected in a way that I think few of us could aspire to and achieve. And you were able to do that in spite of your duties here, in spite of being Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank you for the way in which you have helped me on a lot of different issues to do with my constituency and elsewise, both as a minister and indeed on the backbenches. And I just want to say, finally, that you can leave this place confident and secure, but what you are leaving behind is a very powerful, special and long-lasting legacy.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for what he said. Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to carry on this theme about names, actually, because when I became selected, actually, as a candidate, my neighbour, John Prescott, seemed to have a problem with my name. He kept calling me Melanie. And when I got to the House of Commons, the Speaker seemed to have a problem with my name as well, because he referred to me as Jackie. So I was delighted, Mr. Speaker, that you have never had a problem with my name, and you've always called me Diana, which I'm very grateful. I just want to thank you. First of all, I want to thank you on behalf of the children of Hull, because through Hull Children's University, so many of them have been able to visit Parliament and to be able to use the Education Centre, which I know was very dear to your heart. And you will know Huddersfield's a long way from Westminster. Well, Hull's even further. So it's a great tribute, I think, to your commitment to making sure this place is accessible to children from all around the country. And also I want to thank you on behalf of the Youth Parliament and the work that you've done to support those budding politicians and to have them into this chamber and to oversee their proceedings as well. And I personally would just like to thank you for the kindness that you've shown me. When I've come to you with illness or adversity, you've always been a very decent, kind man, and I very much appreciate that. The other thing I wanted to say is that your use of urgent questions has been remarked on by many in the House today. And I think I probably have the record in terms of the number of urgent questions as a backbencher that you have granted. And that's been on the issue of contaminated blood. And I know that the community who've been infected and affected by that awful scandal in the NHS hold you in very high esteem and regard for allowing parliamentarians to pursue the government of the day and to try and seek justice for what happened to them. So I wanted to say a very big thank you on behalf of that group. And also, you've been innovative around urgent questions, because I remember coming to speak to you when the Church of England made the ridiculous decision that they would not have women bishops. And I asked you, what could Parliament do to make the Church of England think again? And you advised me, although it had never happened before, that an urgent question could be submitted to bring the Church Commissioner to the House to answer for the Church of England. And that was the very first time that had ever been done, an innovation around urgent questions. So again, a very big thank you. And I am delighted that we have one of the women bishops in the Church of England with us today. I just think that is wonderful. And just finally, you've always been a great champion around women's rights, and particularly sensitive issues such as abortion. And you have allowed debate in this chamber on issues that people find very difficult, very sensitive, but I think the way that you have allowed debates to take place has been really important, and particularly around the issue in Northern Ireland. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Walthamstow, is a doughty champion of women's rights, and I know she holds you in such high regard as well. I am going to miss you, and I want to send you every good wish for whatever it is you go on to do, because I know whatever it is, it will be an enormous success, but we will miss you.
Tracy Crouch.
Well, I can exclusively reveal the tactic works, Mr. Speaker. May I start by echoing the opening words from the leader of the House in terms of what you have done to revolutionise the work of the Education Service. I think that the way the Education Service now brings children of all ages through this place, it absolutely introduces them to Parliament. Is phenomenal. And also for what you did with the Youth Parliament. I was very lucky enough to be a minister who had responsibility for the Youth Parliament, and have stood at the dispatch box with the Honourable Lady opposite to make those opening statements. I have to say I found it really quite intimidating. The quality of debate in the Youth Parliament was incredible, and so thank you, sir, for bringing that through here. Can I just say my own personal tribute to the Honourable Lady for Kinnon Valley, because I don't know her particularly well, but I hold her in great esteem, and I shall miss her, and indeed many experienced colleagues that are leaving this place. Young whippersnappers like myself need wise counsel from those who have been here for many, many years. And I'm really grateful that we in Kent have the Honourable Member for North Thanet, who, when we were first elected in 2010, gave all new MPs templates of what it is that he does to help inform us of how we should go forward in terms of dealing with our constituents. I know full well that if I have a difficult piece of casework, that there are members here across the House who have seen it before, and that we can then go to them and get advice. Mr. Speaker, I've known you for what I thought was a long time, but we've never been for curry, so I'm feeling that perhaps we don't know each other as well as I thought we did. But a few weeks ago, I said to Mr. Speaker that in recent months I'd fallen out of love with this chamber. It has been an incredibly challenging time in Parliament, and I just wasn't feeling like I was here, that I really valued what it is that we're doing here. And Mr. Speaker has been kind enough to call me on a regular basis over the last couple of weeks in questions and interventions and so on. And I have fallen back in love with this chamber, and I thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. You've given me the confidence to come back from the front benches to the back benches and feel like I can make a positive contribution in a debate, and so I am genuinely grateful to you. I don't know if colleagues are aware, but right now in all good bookstores, there is a book called Be More Like Bercow. It is an excellent book.
Did he write it?
Mr. Speaker did not write it, but like one of the honourable ladies opposite, I have got him to sign a couple for auctions. It is a self-help book. It is a book with Mr. Speaker quotes that he has said over many, many years, and then on the page next to it, it then gives some self-help. So an example is, well, we've heard Mr. Speaker say many times, calm down, man, a quote that I think will follow you around for some time. And then on the page next to it will be a mindfulness kind of lesson about how to breathe properly in order to calm yourself down. I think we can all learn from elements of the Be More Like Bercow book. One thing that is not in there, however, is how to not go to the toilet for over 9 hours. Mr. Speaker, you have the bladder of a camel. I feel that had you not announced your retirement, that we ought to think about reinstating the commode that is the Speaker's chair, or was once upon a time. I think that you're an extraordinary character, Mr. Speaker, and I've sat here since 9:30 this morning listening to some incredible tributes to you. I feel it's about time that I brought some balance into this, however, because it is true that you have been a champion of backbenchers. You are a champion of sport, and I, as Sports Minister, really appreciated that. And I still am very sorry for playing football here in the chamber. However, Mr. Speaker, you are still a gooner. It is true that, Mr. Speaker, I would like all Speaker candidates to promise me that the next Speaker will not allow for there to be another debate paying tribute to Arsene Wenger again, or indeed any other Arsenal managers, particularly if the Sports Minister who has to reply to it is a lifelong Tottenham fan, as I am. Mr. Speaker, I do not refer to those I employ as my staff. I think of them very much as part of my team. And in this place, we are nothing without those in our team. So may I take this opportunity not just to pay tribute to you, but also to thank Jim, Peter and Ian, who work for you, those that I don't know the names of, but I'm sure keep you in control. But also, can I thank Reverend Rose, who is very much part of our team here in Parliament. I have sought great comfort from her spiritual guidance. I forever will be grateful that she christened my son, Freddie. And so I'd like to thank her, and thank you, sir, and I wish you well in whatever happens next.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you. Oh dear. Mr. Speaker. It was all going so well. What can I say? And primarily, I hope we've moved on since that Wednesday, a few years ago, when you threatened me with an antisocial behaviour order here in this chamber. And I'll keep my remarks brief today, but like the Honourable Lady just alluded to, we are nothing without a good team. And I want to thank Jim, Peter and Ian, and of course Rose, and all of the others in your private office who have served you and all of us so well. They are simply the best of us, and just to demonstrate how their humanity is also so important, one of those gentlemen who I referred to when I was doing the period poverty work, the period poverty campaign, approached me one day in the corridor with a carrier bag, and he'd gone out and he'd bought loads of women's sanitary products, and he said, will you donate this to somebody in need? And he said, I've never done that before. I've never gone into a supermarket or a chemist and bought these items, and I just thought that was really, really touching. Your humanity and your personal touch will never be forgotten, and there's been some very specific occasions when I think that has been really evident, and of course none other than when we lost Joe. The day after, you came to Birstall, which which is obviously next door to my Dewsbury constituency, and you didn't just turn up and lay flowers. You stayed and you talked and you empathised with the local residents, and then you went on to the local church and you spent time again, and it was so appreciated, not just the gesture of actually being there, but your authenticity and actually, like I say, just spending time with local people who were feeling that loss so much. And equally after the dreadful terrorist incident here a couple of years ago, when we lost such a wonderful police officer, and it was such a traumatic time for so many of us, and you were typically stoic but equally very, very supportive as well. And indeed, in the last few months, when at times it's been a very difficult period for me, particularly with some of the abuse that I and particularly many other female members have received, and you actually called me at home one Sunday morning to ask if I was okay, because I'd received a particularly unpleasant, well, all death threats are unpleasant, but I'd received something that was particularly unkind, and I was very, very grateful for your support at that time. You're an extraordinary man, Mr. Speaker. I will miss you hugely. I wish you, your family, and I had the pleasure of chatting to them last week, and your delightful young daughter Jemima, who was an absolutely credit both to you and Sally. I wish you all every happiness. I look forward to reading your memoirs, and I particularly look forward to seeing you in sequins, potentially in a future episode of Strictly Come Dancing. Thank you, above all, for your kindness, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to apologise for not having been here at the beginning. I had to engage in a podcast with the Father of the House. It was a joint podcast. I say joint. He actually took up about 50, at least I think 90% of the whole podcast. So, to be fair, it was joint in the sense that it's joint whenever you sit and hear him and you ask him to speak briefly, and he does exactly that. So, first of all, I want to say a farewell to you, Mr. Speaker. We have known each other for a significant amount of time, I fancy. I want to say that you once referred to me, I think, as a sea green incorruptible. You may or may not remember that. I'm not quite sure to this day what you quite meant by that. But I think I had been rebelling against the government then for some time. And I think I fancy that you thought that was a good thing. And it was on the back of that when I became leader, I employed you, if you might recall, in the Shadow Cabinet as Shadow Chief Secretary. It wasn't altogether a happy period, because I do remember being approached by one particular colleague of ours, who will remain completely nameless, who then upbraided me in one of the lobbies and said, it's fantastic that you've got somebody who is really campaigning on the rights for gay people and out there speaking on all these subjects, he said. And I was thinking, oh, well, very good, thank you. And he said, do you think we could have a Shadow Chief Secretary when you next get to the appointments in the Shadow Cabinet? I think he was not altogether enamoured of your journey, Mr. Speaker, but it was certainly a journey, and it is one that you have taken personal ownership of and have been part of the changes that have come about, and all those changes have been overdue, and I fancy, therefore, your legacy in this matter will also be something that is recorded by everybody, notwithstanding your period in the chair. And it's on that point that I really want to just deal very briefly with the idea of legacy. I remember the quote from Julius Caesar, which is, the evil that men does lives after them, but the good is often terried with the bones. I want to reverse that process and just simply say that there is much that you have done in this House which is going to stand the test of time and will return it, I think, in a way, to where it probably was many, many decades before it became too subjected to the concept of the overarching power of the executive. I say that with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek because when I was unexpectedly in the cabinet for 6 years,
I regularly used to curse you in the mornings at around about 9 o'clock when I heard that you had granted or about to grant a UQ. I think that came at 12, and I had to get some kind of reason why we should not have had that UQ to you, almost invariably told by your office that you had read it but not required that that was the case, and you granted the UQ. And of course, during that period, I don't think any minister would otherwise have not been frustrated, annoyed and angry. However, having returned to the backbenches, I have to congratulate you for reinvigorating the UQ from being an unusual event to being a very standard event. And I hope I have taken advantage of that. And it is true, of course, government doesn't like that. But when you're in government, sometimes surrounded by all these decisions you have to make and things you have to do, coming back to the House, being forced to answer questions is a nuisance. But it is a nuisance that really does matter. And I think that matter alone, if nothing else, will be something which I remember now as a junior backbencher many times frustrated because I couldn't get in on a question and thought that I'd been pushed to one side and everybody else who was senior got in and the usual rules applied. And to that extent, any member coming in here now will not have any knowledge of how it was before. And they're just used to standing and getting called. But I often say to them, well, it was very different in the old days. You might stand for 3 separate questions not related to each other and still not get called, and then eventually you approach the chair and the chair would say, well, next time we will call you, and you would then argue, well, I may not have an interest in the next question, but you would still have to come in and stand. Banishing that and getting rid of that process has been and will stand as a very, very important legacy by you, Mr. Speaker, because it does allow non-privy councillors to get their word in. I have one word of slight advice, that I generally take the rule that in this place, after about an hour, there is absolutely nothing that anybody is going to get up to and say that has not already been said at least 3 or 4 times. But you have been incredibly tolerant that even on the 5th time it is worth hearing, and sometimes quite important. So on that, I think your use of this place, your reforms to this place were overdue. And I remind also, colleagues, that you came in at a very difficult time. This House was in shame. The expenses scandal was all that people in the country actually saw and thought of us in this place. They thought that all of us were corrupt, all of us were involved in it only for our own sakes, a fact which is completely untrue, as you know, that people come here because they genuinely believe that they want to do good and to try and improve the quality of life for their constituents and citizens around the country. But this was overarchingly now the form. We are still suffering to some degree from that. But I think the reforms were necessary to be done, such as opening this place up much more, letting younger people come into here, using the educational service and expanding that process, and giving, as I said earlier on, colleagues the power to bring governments into the dispatch box, to ask those questions, and to force them, even in difficult moments, to answer the most difficult questions of the day. That is, I think, a set of vital reforms that I cannot see any future speaker reversing, nor should they, because they are absolutely structural. We haven't always agreed, Mr. Speaker, on everything, nor should we, and there are times when, I confess, I've been somewhat frustrated, but as my honourable friend said earlier on, it isn't really about being frustrated about the decisions. It's whether somebody or not is consistent in the process that they engage in. And the one thing that you have been absolutely consistent in is your belief that backbenchers have the right and should have the power to be heard, regardless of whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them, whether sometimes they say things that might be an abhorrence to others. They have the right, because they were elected here, to be heard in this place without fear or favour. And in restoring that process, Mr. Speaker, I think that will be your greatest legacy. And therefore, in that, I wish you a very good, I suspect not retirement, but some other kind of career, maybe speaking across the States, where I gather you are becoming quite a celebrity on the speaking circuit. But whatever else you do, I know you will bring to it certainly not short speeches, but longer speeches, with words that nobody has ever understood or heard before. But notwithstanding that, they will be fascinated by it, as I have always been by your approach at the chair. So I wish you the very best of fortune, and I consider it, in a way, a privilege to have been in this House at the period when these reforms have taken place, and that you were the architect of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I get the opportunity again today for the second time. Thangam debonair.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say thank you to you on behalf of 3 groups of people. And one group is obviously, other members have mentioned, that the school children who've been through the Education Centre, thanks to you, and they've been inspired by that experience. I just want to echo that tribute that others have paid to you. But I want to add 2 other groups. One is my constituents. You have a lot of fans in Bristol West. If ever you feel like popping down, you will find a very warm welcome. And many of them have asked me to pass on to you their admiration, the fact that they've been glued to the television over the last year, which I do still think is really... It's an interesting byproduct of where we've been politically, that people are texting me saying, what's that funny thing you do when you bow at the table thing, they say. And, you know, that sort of interest has been facilitated by you. And then a slightly quirkier one is I want to say thank you on behalf of the very unofficial Parliamentary String Quartet, the Statutory Instruments. It was in your Speaker's Palace at a Christmas celebration last year that Emily Benn and I first hatched up the plot. We were enjoying the Christmas tree and I think probably some Christmas carols and possibly some mince pies at the time, so I will always be grateful to you for being there at the birth, perhaps, of the Parliamentary String Quartet and then at its first performance. And every time we play, we will be thinking of you. We're a little bit thwarted because we were supposed to be playing at a concert for the Archbishop of Canterbury on December the 12th. And I gather that we're going to be doing something else on that day. Oh. But the Statutory Instruments, we are grateful to you. And other people have said this, but I feel I have to add that you and Reverend Rose, and I can't be here for her tribute, you have been here for us at our darkest hours as well as our moments of joy and celebration. And those dark moments have been very dark indeed. June in 2016 in particular, and then as my friend, the Honourable Member for Dewsbury has referred to, the murder of PC Keith Palmer, and other times as well. You've been here for us. And it's been an incredible... it's a source of great support and comfort, both spiritual and non-spiritual, that the 2 of you have given to us as individuals. And then, as a whip, your views on whips are well known. And I think, actually, despite what's been said about your views on whips, I've always known you to be actually really rather kind and helpful to us. And sitting here in Whip's Corner for 3 years now, I can't believe it's been 3 years, but I think the Chief will confirm that I have been an opposition whip now for 3 years. You have been extraordinary. I've learned such a lot from working by your side, and also, of course, from Peter, Ian and Jim, to whom I also owe a great debt of thanks, and I hope that they will not be leaving us, even if you are. I do think that the Leader of the House could perhaps have cleared up a mystery for us. He said that modernisation to him is an expletive. I think he said that. If that is so, I am slightly perplexed that he hasn't taken this opportunity to confirm that your 10 years of public service are being rewarded in the traditional manner. And I do think it would be courteous of somebody on the Treasury bench to clear that mystery up for us at some point in the not too distant future. And I think the traditional time to do that would be today. So he's shaking his head at me from a sedentary position. But I do think that somebody ought to clear that up. However, I know that whatever it is you go on to do, you will do so, I hope, billowed up on a cloud of love from us all, and admiration, and great enjoyment and collegiate spirit that you have shown to us, and I hope we have shown to you. And some of the greatest and the darkest moments in my 4 years here have been enhanced by your presence in the chair, including tiny little thing, which I think will best be left to my memoirs or yours, which involves a packet of peanuts and an order paper. Yes, you know of which I speak. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good luck.
Thank you. Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Time does not allow me to do justice to cover all the amazing work that you have done in the service of this Parliament. Before I came to this Parliament, I was a young barrister, and I was told brevity is a virtue, not a vice, so keep it short. And you've applied that rule in this Parliament when we have all spoken. Mr. Speaker, there's three things which I want to cover: accessibility, the way that you have treated backbench members of Parliament, and the issue of well-being. On the issue of accessibility, we all, members of Parliament, are amongst equals in this place, and you have applied that rule. And as a young member of Parliament many, many years ago, when you think you need to speak to the Speaker of Parliament, you contact the Speaker's office. I would like to speak to the Speaker of Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Chishti. And within minutes, the Speaker can be reached on his mobile phone in his constituency. Thank you to you and your brilliant team around you. I see one standing there, and there's others. Of course, members of Parliament judge the moment when they need to speak to our Speaker. You are our Speaker, and the accessibility is a key thing for members of Parliament, for anyone, when they want to reach a person in responsibility. You, Mr. Speaker, have always done that. The second point is the champion of backbench members of Parliament. We all have our own cases. For me, Mr. Speaker, one thing which I can never compromise on, and I've done it throughout Parliament, is freedom of religion or belief. I came to this country as the son of an imam. My father was an imam, my grandfather was an imam, my uncles were imams. When I came to Gillingham in 1984, we could practice our religion openly and freely at every level. And morally and ethically, it would be wrong for me to stand up at any level when I see those individuals of minority faiths being persecuted. In 2014, Mr. Speaker, I wrote to you to ask for an adjournment debate in relation to the abuse of blasphemy laws in Pakistan, which are being targeted against minority faiths, and the case of Asha Bibi, who was on death row, before it came up in the media in the last year. I wrote to you, and you, Mr. Speaker, you gave me the chance to raise that on the floor of this House. Not just then, Mr. Speaker, but then knowing what matters to members of Parliament. We all have different issues that we champion. You, Mr. Speaker, you have been absolutely brilliant to realise and see the issues that matter to members of Parliament. So then when I resigned from government in November 2018, the government did not agree with my view on Asha Bibi case. I stepped aside. But then I wanted to question the Prime Minister at PMQs. I was not on the order paper. I was sitting right there. I'm slightly short, but I stopped bobbing up. And you, Mr. Speaker, called me so I could raise my issue with the person who had to make the final decision in that matter. So to you, for being a champion of members of Parliament on the backbench, you have been absolutely amazing. The third point I want to cover is this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's some outside who do not see members of Parliament or those who work here as fellow human beings. We are all human beings, and we all suffer from the challenges which every other citizen in our great country have challenges and issues that arise. And I want to touch on the work that you, Mr. Speaker, have done on the well-being of members of Parliament and those who work in this great Parliament. Mr. Speaker, there's three things I want to put on record. The way that you've dealt with those issues with compassion, with decency, and complete regard to human dignity, I cannot thank you enough for the way you have dealt with that. And you put in place a system with a brilliant Dr. Madden. It's a clinician-led approach. And I thank her because often those who do that work behind the scenes do not get given that credit. They do an amazing job. And Mr. Speaker, if individuals applied your approach of making sure that individuals, those who work here at whatever level, get the support when they need it, quickly, swiftly, appropriately, individuals can go on and be better than before. But that comes down to individuals in responsibility taking those decisions. And I end with this, Mr. Speaker. I was very fortunate to represent the Prime Minister in the Holy See at the canonisation of Cardinal Newman. I did not know much about Cardinal Newman, but when I was there, I listened to that great man's values. One of the hymns was "Lead Kindly Light." I cannot see the distant scene. A step at a time is enough for me. You, Mr. Speaker, in the 10 years that you've sat there,
Every step that you've taken, it has been for the betterment of this Parliament. To you, sir, thank you.
Thank you. Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened very carefully to the opening statement by the Leader of the House. I was interested to hear what he had to say. He's somebody I always listen very carefully to. He chooses his words very carefully, and he gives me the impression, at least, that he understands the meaning of them. After all, he's the only person I know who reads the lounge suit inside his jacket and takes it as instructions for use. But you, Mr. Speaker, have been someone who has challenged the rights of backbenchers. And I think there are people in this House who at times have benefited from that, who perhaps, now time has moved on, don't quite appreciate the way that you've stood up for the rights of this House and for those of us who have wanted to stand up for our constituents. And the people I want to particularly pay tribute to you for standing up for are the people of the 48% who voted in 2016 to remain in the European Union. Because if we had listened to the government's views on the outcome of the referendum, which we all respect, you would have believed that it was a resounding victory and the country wasn't split at that time in 2016. But indeed, the country was split. And it was for this House to stand up and hold the government to account and speak up for the views of those people who wanted to remain part of the European Union, but in leaving wanted to retain as much of our relationship with the European Union as we could. And without you, Mr. Speaker, having the strength of character to stand up to an executive that was prepared to try and run roughshod over those of us that wanted to hold the government to account, I think we would be in a very different place now. And that's a tribute to you. And I think that that has earned you a place in history for these very trying times. And it's one that you deserve enormous credit for, in my opinion. And it's one that I will always admire you for, because at times it was very difficult for you. You were out there as an individual having to stand up to those people. And no doubt you've got an excellent team around you. But you did it. You did it for us. And for that, I'll always be grateful. I also like to be grateful to your team. I went in, I don't do it very often, but I went in to plea with them that I could get called at Prime Minister's questions to raise something on behalf of a disabled constituent who had had their PIP taken away and were about to have their car repossessed on the Thursday after Prime Minister's questions. I didn't think I was going to get called, but because you have been generous with the time at Prime Minister's questions, you allowed it to overrun right at the tail end. And I always seem to get called at the tail end, but nonetheless, if you're patient, you get there. And you called me right at the end. And I can say to you, Mr. Speaker, and I thanked you when I was interviewed on the radio subsequently about this issue, as a consequence of me being able to raise that at Prime Minister's questions because you heard my plea and called me, that the lives of my constituents were completely transformed in a moment. And that's the power of being in that chair. And I pay tribute to you for the way you stood up for us backbenchers so that we can stand up for our constituents. My constituents' PIP was reinstated and they didn't have their car repossessed. Your inspired appointment of Rose Hudson Wilkin is, I think, is a testament again to your strength of character, your determination to modernise and take us forward as a House of Commons representing all of the people. And I pay tribute to Rose. I think she's got an amazing career ahead of her and will be a very influential person in our society going forwards in whatever role she goes on to when she ceases to be chaplain to the Speaker of the House. My last point, Mr. Speaker, you came in 1997 when I did. You've got a constituency in the home counties. I've got one in London, so no doubt you had schools frequently visiting this place, taking them round on tours. And then on those rainy days when they wanted to have their packed lunch being told that the Speaker of the House and the Sergeant-at-Arms don't allow packed lunches to be eaten in the Westminster Hall. Yeah. And we didn't even have a cafeteria down there, and when we got the cafeteria, it wasn't accessible to school children because you had to be buying something if you were in there. And it was an appalling place for young people to visit in terms of how they were welcomed. They were awestruck by the place and being taken round, and no doubt educated by all their MPs that were boring them to tears with the details of the House. But nonetheless, it was important that they were here. They were inspired by it, but then the House was very unwelcoming to them. The changes that you have brought about in opening up the education unit to this place, opening this place up to make young people welcoming, make it a welcoming place for young people, I think has been inspired. I want to see more people, the Speaker that follows you, to do more of that. Yeah. But it is a mark of the way that you've brought modernisation and change to this House. You've earned your place in the history of this House, and I wish you all the best for your future.
Yeah. Bless you, Clive. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Andrew Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to pay tribute to you today. I've known you for the best part of 30 years. And I'd like to echo everything that's been said in the Chamber today, but I'm not going to repeat some of those tributes. I'd like to add to the tributes by saying things that haven't been said. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your patriotism, for being an upholder of tradition, and for being a lover of your country. You are a patriot. The Mother of the House said you were politically correct. Well, on these issues, you have never been politically correct. It was you, sir, who supported the long-running campaign to ensure the flag of our country was flown from the Victoria Tower every single day of the year. The House will recall that it was only flown when the House is sitting, and in the early part of 2010, the House agreed, with Mr. Speaker's support, statement was made in the House, the flag would fly every day of the year, 365 days of the year permanently, and that is I think, a subject of pride in our country and is appreciated by many. Is also, Mr. Speaker, who has upheld the tradition of St George's Day for England. When we celebrate our traditions for England, Speaker's House has been opened to the Royal Society of St George and for organisations that have celebrated our English heritage. And I thank you, sir, for allowing the St George's Day organisations to come to Speaker's House and celebrate the 23rd of April. But I also remember that it was this Speaker, Mr Speaker, you, sir, who allowed the tradition, the sad tradition, I have to say, of crests of MPs that have been assassinated and murdered to be displayed in this chamber. For a very long time, the crest of Eri Neve was there, but the previous Speaker was not in favour of additional crests. And if the Speaker, Mr Speaker, you recall that Lord Howe of Aberfan and myself came to see you and asked if we could have a crest in favour in memory of the late Ian Gow, who had been murdered. And you were very supportive of that and led to not only a crest for the late Ian Gow, but also Dr. Robert Bradford, also the others that, of course, Joe Cox, and the others that were killed by Irish terrorists, Sir Anthony Berry, of course. So it is you, Mr Speaker, that have allowed that tradition to be reinstated, so we can remember members of Parliament who are so cruelly taken from us by assassination and political murder. And also, the Diamond Jubilee of Her Majesty the Queen was a great celebration in the whole of Parliament. But it was Mr Speaker who opened Speaker's House for a wonderful celebration of representatives of all of Her Majesty's realms and territories who came to London for that wonderful celebration. And indeed, how can we forget the renaming of the clock tower to the Elizabeth Tower? So there are many things that, Mr Speaker, you will be remembered for and thanked for, but most of all, from my own personal point of view, for your kindness, your friendship, your understanding, your willingness to deal with issues when they arose, and to be on the side of backbenchers who also need a voice, and you've made sure we've had that voice. Mr. Speaker, you have been a wonderful champion of this House. You have promoted the Mother of Parliaments, and I believe that you will be remembered for many years to come.
Dr. David Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just start by saying what an honour it is to sit next to my honourable friend, right honourable friend, who will be sadly missed, and I completely associate myself with remarks for the Honourable Gentleman for New Forest East. Now, I want to say something rather different. I want to take you back to a trip we made together to the Sudan. And I know you agreed to go at quite short notice. And we needed a Conservative member, and you agreed to come on that trip. And when people say, and I've never been to the Sudan, and this was pre-secession, without getting unwell, when you say that someone looks green, usually it's a great exaggeration. But I can assure you, on that trip when we flew around, on one occasion I looked at you and you were green. You were absolutely unwell, but you carried on, and we got to Nyala, which was at that time one of the hearts of the struggle for Darfur. As we got there, all the lights went out, but it was wonderful because they said, don't worry, we're going to go away to the local takeaway and we'll get you something to eat. I remember all day we hadn't had anything to eat, probably we didn't want anything to eat. Now, I was eternally grateful for what they brought back. I'm a vegetarian and I couldn't eat what they brought back, but you, because you were there, as always, and you ate. And the great tribute that they gave to us was that we were going to share the President's bedroom. And you and I went to the President's bedroom, and that was fine. But we were then able to take advantage of using the President's toilet. Now, whether it was a tradition of the Sudanese or not, but the President's toilet had previously been used. And I now know why you were going to be such a steadfast speaker, able to sit in that chair for 9 hours. Because you and I decided that it was one asked too many to use the President's toilet. And I now know why you're able to sit there for 9 hours, because the constitution of this speaker in this House has been built, dare I say, in that President's palace in Nyala. But you've been a friend, I know, going round, and people don't realise that making those trips, it is our role and responsibility to go out and to visit the trouble spots of the world. And you did that, and I know you've done it, and hopefully you will do it in the future, because you will be welcome, you will be admired, and they will see you, not necessarily as the former speaker. In the States, where they always refer to people as congressmen and senators, even though they may not any longer be in office. But it's been an honour to call you a friend, and as I say, that trip we made will always stand in my memory. I've been a number of times since, as you know, but we do say thank you to you, and long may your life continue, and hopefully toilets will be slightly better than one we were asked to use on that occasion. Thank you, Mrs.
Bless you, I've never forgotten that trip, and I never will do so, for all sorts of reasons. Bob Seeley.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I thought I'd missed the tributes to you, sir, because I thought they'd been. I'm delighted that I haven't. I was actually here today to follow your advice. And by the way, it's a great pleasure to follow the honourable member for Stroud. I fear I lack your constitution, because actually I've been dying for the loo, but I also wanted to get in, so I'm holding it in for the moment. I'm following your advice to persist, Mr. Speaker, because I was actually here to try to follow up to get an answer from the Leader of the House, if he wanted to give one, on whether the government would allow debate in future on Huawei and the importance of 5G. But I'm very happy to ignore that if you feel that wouldn't be inappropriate.
No, I said to the honourable gentleman he could raise what he wanted to raise with the Leader.
That is very kind of you, sir, because I fear I might have not for the first time misread the order paper. However, it will make you happy to know that since Erskine May has been available online, I have been using it and taking it to my bed every night and reading it. And indeed, I was going to raise a point of order to ask Mr. Speaker, why paragraph 12 in chapter 20 consisted not of one paragraph but two, but the whips advised me against it. I think it was on the Saturday sitting, and we were all very keen to get away. Your support for backbenchers is always important and is incredibly welcome. And your calling ministers to account is excellent as well, because scrutiny always strengthens. And I think any good minister always appreciates being called for an urgent question, because it gives the chance to explain government position. And if a minister is happy to explain the government position, then the minister is confident of the government's position. And if not, there should be questions as to why they fear being called. So thank you for that. And I hope that tradition of UQs amongst any of the future speakers will continue, because it is very important that it does. Likewise, the Education Centre, I think, has been superb. And Ryde Academy in my constituency, on my island, and their excellent teacher there often brings the kids down, and regularly that is the most trying interviews that I've had are with primary and secondary school children from my island who test me and my knowledge as best they can, and long may that continue. I've specifically, Mr. Speaker, got some of my constituents who have written to me saying how much they will miss you, but specifically miss you chastising me. And indeed, so often, one of them in particular said, so often has that reprimanding and guidance become that they regularly look forward to being told off by you on a regular, indeed almost weekly basis now. So you have brought joy to many people, occasionally myself, but very often to my constituents, especially if you've been beasting me. On the point of persist. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. If the Leader of the House has a chance to answer, 5G, very significant issue, very little public and parliamentary debate about that. What can we do about that, and can we get a debate before decisions are made so that we can give our opinion of what we think the options are? Thank you so much indeed, sir.
Extremely gracious of the honourable gentleman, whom I've known for a very long time, and I thank him for what he said, and I know the Leader will want to respond to him. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As it is a statement, I probably should have been replying to everything, but I think in the broad context it was better not to have done. But 5G is of course a matter of concern, and one the government takes very seriously. And the security and resilience of the UK's telecom networks is of the greatest importance. I obviously can't promise debates at the moment, because we will have the dissolution on Wednesday, but the general election is coming up, and I have a feeling this is a matter that will be of interest to many people to ensure that we have a safe and secure system. The government has not as yet made a decision, and that is an important point to underline. In spite of press reports to the contrary, a decision will be made in due course, and I think a wide debate amongst the British public is the best thing that we can have. We should always trust the people.
Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. I don't intend to speak for too long, because there have been some wonderful compliments made, and it's sometimes hard to sit and listen to people complimenting you, and that's a very human thing to do. So I would just like to say thank you, from the first handshake when I took my oath and your words, to your lovely note after my first speech, to the tea morning with the new entrance with Rose and yourself in your chambers, and for the huge help that you have given and your staff have given with regards to Grace's sign and the Any Disability sign, but also to the JP Mackintosh lecture that took place in the Speaker's House, which was gratefully received by his family and the people of East Lothian. For all of that and so much more, can I just say thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable gentleman. Tom Tugendhat.
Mr. Speaker, I can see you're saving the best till last. It's,
That's what I was thinking.
it's a huge pleasure to speak and say thank you this afternoon, forgive me. I wonder, though, whether when we bump into each other again in years to come, I will feel as I did that time I jumped off my bicycle and a man 6 feet taller than I looked at me and said, "Hello, sir. I noticed you haven't polished your shoes today." He was the Academy Sergeant Major from Sandhurst, and I was wearing trainers. He was pointing out what he knew then, which is standards matter, and you have defended the standards in this House religiously. And for that, I can only be extremely grateful, because defending the rights of parliamentarians isn't actually about defending 650 people who may or may not have an opinion on a subject. It's defending the very principle of democracy in our country. It's defending the very principle of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and indeed individual liberty. And it is absolutely defending the foundations of the economy and the society that we have built with much care, many failures, but over many, many decades. And so for that, I am hugely grateful. And on a personal basis, if I may, there is one thing that I would like to thank you as well. You have not only introduced us to a wonderful chaplain who is here and to whom I pay huge personal thanks and tribute, but actually you've introduced a new chaplain in Father Pat Brown. And to have a Catholic chaplain in this house, to have a regular Mass on a Wednesday afternoon, is an act of extreme kindness to many of us in the Catholic community here in this place, but also reflects the fact that this house doesn't now legislate for the exclusion of one religion, does not now silence one form of worship, does not now reject the individual practice of so many people in these islands. And now I know you have been on a journey, and some people have spoken of your origins in one wing of the party and your arrival at the seat in which you now find yourself, and the defender of many liberties that would have surprised others 20 or 30 years ago. And many of us have been on a journey. I see the leader of the House sitting there, who, when I used to sit next to him, was a guardian of the purity of this house, and has gone from the purity of the Vestal Virgin to the whore of Babylon, deep in the executive power, with the speed of an extraordinary, of a whippet. But he is there, and we've all been on various different journeys. So I'm delighted that your journey has taken you to where you are now, and I'm personally grateful that the last 4 years, and particularly the 2 that I've had the privilege to chair the Foreign Affairs Committee, have been under your speakership, as you've enabled those of us who are very new to this place to have a voice, and I hope to represent some of the views that need speaking up for in our House, even if maybe sometimes we may chunter when criticised, almost certainly justifiably, but sometimes that may give us the cause to remember that actually your defence means sometimes we are in the wrong too. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I, on behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party, Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for all that you've done as Speaker. And can also pay tribute to the Honourable Lady for Colne Valley. She sits behind me in this row regularly, and usually in her colour of red, very often. I said to this morning before we come into the chamber, very often the Honourable Lady was the conscience for many in this chamber when it comes to human rights issues. And I know that when she spoke on human rights issues in this chamber, I was more than pleased to join with her on those opportunities to speak out and speak up for those across the world who don't have a voice, and who we in this House are very privileged to have a voice and be the voice for them. As a new member, Mr. Speaker, when I came in here in 2010, I said to you earlier on, I was just a tad nervous, and maybe a wee bit apprehensive. I never ever thought, Mr. Speaker, that I would be in the House of Commons. It was perhaps maybe a dream, but something that never really happened in my life, and it did. And when I came in here, I remember vividly, Mr. Speaker, meeting you, and when you shook my hand, and you did it with a welcome and a very generous introduction. And at once, Mr. Speaker, I felt the warmth that you exuded then, and you exude now, and that put me at ease in this House. It didn't put me at ease with my maiden speech, because I was nervous as can be about that. But once you got that speech over, you realised that you could do it. As I learned the rules and the regulations of the House under your guidance, occasionally chastising myself, always rightfully and always justly, and I know that. And as I learned that the word "you" can only be used, but not for you, your good self, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure if I've learnt that yet, but I know I'm trying hard to learn it, and I will endeavour to do so over the next period of time. As a backbench champion that you are, we in this House, and I felt that our views would always have an opportunity, and the voice of Strangford, to quote you, Mr. Speaker, that Strangford must and will be heard, and it was in this House, and we thank you for that. Your choice of Speaker's chaplain, which we'll have a chance in a few moments to refer to, and I wish to do that as well, was right and appropriate. Your choice of the Sergeant of Arms was also appropriate, and I support both of those. And for all your team support for Peter, for Ian, for Jim as well, always kind, always courteous, and undoubtedly a great team. Behind every great man, Mr. Speaker, and I believe, Mr. Speaker, you are a great man, is a great woman. And you've been very blessed and very privileged to have at your side as your wife, Sally, and her support for you was and is vital. And thank you to Sally and to the children for the support they give you. Because I know myself, Mr. Speaker, how important it is to have a family behind you to give you that support and that you need. The future, I believe, Mr. Speaker, for you will be successful. It will be incredible. I'm a great believer, as you know, Mr. Speaker, in the power of prayer. I always have, and your chaplain will know that as well. And I believe that with prayer you can move mountains. And you know that every morning I pray for you, Mr. Speaker, and that will continue to do that in the times that when you're not in this chair and you've moved on to other jobs. You will not be forgotten, certainly not by me in this House, Mr. Speaker. I want to say as well, I will miss you in this House, Mr. Speaker. I'll miss you not least of all for the adjournment debates that you and I shared on many occasions, and your not having you present there will be a minus for me, but hopefully there'll be someone else there to take your place. And I want to thank you for your kindness, for your friendliness, and for your wise guidance that you give to myself and many others in this House. I wish you God bless, Mr. Speaker. I wish you Godspeed. Thank you for all that you do and did, and wish you every success for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir John Hay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, for the Leader of the House, I'm coming to you, but first for the Leader of the House. William Morris said that the very foundation of refinement includes green trees, flowery meads and living waters outside. And my constituents in Market Deeping seek just those things as they crave open spaces. And I hope the Leader of the House, in the time available, there are 2 more days after all, will allow for an urgent statement on how planning policy guidance can be altered so that such open spaces are provided for communities like those in the Deepings, so that future generations may have the chance to choose to work, play, rest and enjoy at their leisure. Now you, Mr. Speaker, my friend, my wife said to me, she said, how will you manage when John goes? I said, I have no idea. I'll have to compete on equal terms. Mr. Speaker, John Ruskin said, no cultivation of mind can make up for a want of natural abilities. And you, sir, have no such want. Indefatigable, irrepressible, incomparable, you certainly are. But much more than that. In a time in which our politics is an unhappy marriage of hysterical hyperbole and technocratic turgidity, you have brought theatre to this place and life and art to your role. Now, there are some people on this side of the chamber who see that art as a sort of Jackson Pollock with a touch of Damien Hirst. But I see you more as Van Gogh, a vibrance and vividity, a colour and theatricality, which reveals rather than conceals sensitivity and deep humanity, for those are your qualities. Many people have spoken about your achievements, the Education Centre and the change in balance between the House and the Executive, prominent amongst them. But it is that business, that business of making this place alive, relevant, giving our proceedings that very theatricality which gives life to our democracy, which will be your most lasting legacy. That is why you are so widely known outside this place, and widely admired, by the way, too. And I thank you profoundly for that. For as our polemic becomes increasingly strange, brutish, cruel, as a result of social media, which I understand takes place on computers. I've never seen it myself, but I understand it takes place on computers and other sort of devices. As that effect has had its mark, you have stood proud from it. I thank you for all you've done, and I thank you for your friendship, which, of course, I hope and trust will endure long beyond the roles we now play. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm almost beyond words. I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I do beg the Leader of the House's pardon, of course, the Leader of the House.
So sorry, and good heavens, our right honourable friend was as beautifully eloquent as ever. In his first request for a debate on open bases and a statement, I could bring his attention to the adjournment debate that will take place on Tuesday, to which I will be responding. The only drawback is that that is primarily for right honourable members who are retiring, a category into which I hope my right honourable friend is not tempted to fall.
Yes. Yes. It may well depend upon the interpretive approach taken by the chair. It will not be me, but we shall see what happens. But I note what the leader says. Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I haven't prepared anything, but I just need to say that, first of all, I won't be here for the tributes to the chaplain, but the House's loss is, I'm afraid, Canterbury's gain, so I am absolutely thrilled that, that I will get to see much more of Rose Wilkin in my constituency, so that's brilliant. It's so difficult to put into words what seeing you in the chair means to people like me and on the backbenches. And some of these speeches have just been incredibly moving. I think I need to find a new word for kindness. And I think if we look in Hansard today, the word that will have come up the most is that one. I don't know how to express my gratitude for how immensely patient and lovely you've been. I don't want to get too emotional, but my father has Alzheimer's and his recent memories are not that great, but he will never forget and never stops talking about the day that I was sworn in and how kind you were to my very ordinary family who'd never set foot in a place like this. You made an effort to sort of wave to them and mention them, and my dad was talking about it even yesterday when we were at a family funeral. So it meant a great deal to him and my family, and that's something that I will never forget. But when those of us who are here, especially women and backbenchers who are pretty terrified of this experience, get up and talk about things that are personal and make us vulnerable, the fact that I can stand here and look at you and you are a bit like a lighthouse in a really stormy sea, and you, in my speech that I made recently, where I felt very vulnerable, you kept me going, and I just kept concentrating on you, and I knew that you were there sort of emotionally holding my hand, which you've done physically as well, which is lovely. And I don't know how to thank you enough, but I'm trying to say thank you, and I'll never ever forget your kindness, and thank you very much.
Honourable Lady doesn't have to thank me at all. It's been a great privilege, as in respect of every other colleague, but I hugely appreciate what she's said, which is said with evident and palpable sincerity. I will come to the Honourable Gentleman in due course. Does the Honourable Gentleman want to come in on this? Yes, Craig McKinley.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going to speak today, and this is a very special day for you. And I just wanted to put on record a couple of my times with you. I recall, and I think I mentioned it too, when you first shook my hand when I took up my place here in 2015, that we had a tea together some many years ago, I think when perhaps you were in a different place politically, but we'll put that aside. But there was one kindness I think you gave me, and actually you've earned me a few pennies whilst being in this house, because I'm not always the first to be called, I'm not always the last, but I've earned many a good coin from the Honourable Gentleman from North East Leicestershire, North West Leicestershire, because we often have a little bet as to who's going to be up last. So I'm very grateful to you for adding to my wealth and detracting from the wealth of my honourable friend. But I do recall, after my very difficult experience at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and I knew that you took a great interest in that throughout, the day after my acquittal, we had business questions, and I came to speak to you at the chair and say, I have rather more to say than would be appropriate at the business questions. And you did indeed allow me, on that very special day for me, the opportunity to express in far more minutes than one would usually allow for business questions to, explain what I'd been through and the annoyance thereof. And for that basis, there's lots that I haven't agreed with you over the last few years, but on that basis, your fairness to me and to others in the House who face difficulties, I will never forget. And it was a great opportunity to put on record in this great international public space what I'd been through and the annoyances I'd felt. So I thank you for that, probably for that occasion more than any other since my time in the House, and I wish you every great success in the future, a long life and much happiness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That is extremely gracious of the honourable gentleman, and I thank him from the bottom of my heart.
Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for the great city of Southend was right when he said earlier that today is a day where the House comes together to say a fond farewell. And there are so many to whom we can say a fond farewell, indeed some in the chamber, Anne from Kinnan Valley, Jim from Coventry. But can I add just one additional fond farewell, and that's to the remarkable Right Honourable Member for Meriden, Caroline Spellman. She is a truly outstanding parliamentarian who was prepared to put the national interest over narrow party political interest. She is somebody who is lionised by Jaguar workers and by Land Rover workers as we've worked together to defend the interests of our manufacturing base against the background of Brexit. She will be sorely missed. Mr. Speaker, yours has been a remarkable trajectory from being a man in an organisation that was so right-wing that even Norman Tebbit abolished it, through being a fully paid-up Macmillanite to I know not where. And I know not where because you do not wear your politics or your prejudices on your sleeve. You are, Mr. Speaker, truly impartial. In 600 years of our parliamentary democracy, there have been few champions of Parliament as great as you, writing a noble chapter in the history of Parliament, including crucially enabling Parliament to hold the executive to account. That may sometimes be frustrating for the front bench opposite. There's been time, and no doubt, from the times when the Right Honourable member for Downton Abbey, the leader of the House, might expressed his concerns and frustrations, but what you have done is to hold the executive to account, allow Parliament to hold the executive to account. And you've done that without suffering the fate of some of your predecessors who literally lost their heads. You've been a great champion of parliamentarians, but there's no question about it. Reference has been made to this earlier on. Our country is deeply divided. Sadly, we see a politics of hate on the march, sometimes manifested in attacks upon parliamentarians. You've been a champion of parliamentarians, including on that front. But also, you've been a champion of reaching out to the country. At troubled times, truly a bridge over troubled waters. You've been a champion also of opening up Parliament. You've built a brilliant team on the one hand, including the wonderful Rose, reflecting the rich diversity of our capital city and our country. But on the other hand, you've also been a champion of opening up Parliament to young people. And I'll never forget your powerful addresses at the 4 Erdington Youth Parliaments. And I remember meeting a group of apprentices from the Erdington Skills Centre the week after, and one of them said, "That bloke, Bercow, he is really something, is he not?" And as a consequence of what you've done, thousands, tens of thousands of young people have come to the cradle of our democracy, and they've loved every moment. Mr. Speaker, you're somebody with a remarkable Shakespearean turn of phrase, a rhetorical flourish, the like of which I don't think I've ever heard. but you're somebody who's also been a humble individual, reaching out to those often suffering difficulties in their life, in their career, in Parliament. There are so many here today who will never ever forget your kindness when kindness was desperately needed. And if I can just say this in conclusion, you're not just one of Parliament's greatest speakers, who in centuries to come will be remembered like some of the great figures of the past. You're a family man, a profound family man, but also, Mr. Speaker, forgive me if I say this, you're just a plain, decent man. We will never, ever forget you.
I'm immensely obliged to the honourable gentleman. As he knows, I've told him many times how much I appreciate his support, and I do so again in the public square this afternoon. Thank you. Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, before turning to you, can I just make the point that there's been unconfirmed bad news about my constituent Amelia Bambridge. Can I say that everyone has wished she be found alive and well? I ask that people use sensitivity and common sense to avoid circulating distressing images. Can I say that as technically the longest-serving Conservative Member of Parliament, though the Father of the House I think still would be properly having that title, that from me to the most recent person elected to this House, we acknowledge all the good that you've done and the good that's been done while you've been Speaker. For those who want to write you off in retirement, I have to warn them that in 1856, Cromwell found out that a unicameral Parliament was a bad idea. 1656, forgive me. And he created the other house. They couldn't decide on the title, which is why we use the expression the other house for the House of Lords. And in the last 353 to 361 years, we have relied on some of the words that Speaker Lenthal used. He actually went from this chamber to the other house and then came back as Speaker. And that, of course, is open to you if you want to break precedent in more ways than you have already. When a decision was taken in the chair by you, I put down an early day motion, or I submitted an early day motion to the clerks, giving a direction that it shouldn't happen again. And they, I think, humorously, at least I assume it's humorously, said, how could I do that? So I said, what were the only words people could remember about a previous Speaker? And they were Lenthal's words, that he could only do what the House directs. And if that's true, putting down a motion to give a direction to the occupant of the chair would seem perfectly proper, and it was accepted. I want to say that although you weren't my first choice in the year that you were elected as Speaker, I honour you and I praise Sir George Young for asking you and you agreeing that he could have his party in your house. I think that shows the mood and the friendship that exists in this place, and that has continued strongly with you as Speaker. I explained to my constituents that had they chosen you rather than me in Worthing West in 1996, they could have been represented by the Speaker for the last 10 years. And when one of them said his tenure of 10 years seems rather longer than the 9 years, I said he did say he was going after 9 years, and 10 years is after 9 years, isn't it? And if any pedant uses the words you actually put in your letter, I shall criticise them for being too pernickety. I've dragged you to the chair twice. We don't have to drag you out of it, because you are... because you've chosen the time to leave, and I think that as people heard from me privately a year ago, that you deserved a margin of appreciation. I think that those who would want to make a great fuss about the time you've been in the chair are wrong, although I think that at some calm period we may want to discuss whether there should be a normal expectation that the Speaker will do up to 9 years, as you had once indicated. I think it would also be a useful idea if we could have a debate in some period of calm as to whether we should have a regular discussion, perhaps every 2 years, on the way that the chair is occupied and decisions are made, because I think that it's one of the areas where I think we can contribute, and the occupant of the chair can consider, and the procedure committee, whether much can be done about that. There are a few things that people don't know about what you do, but the one that was mentioned by my honourable friend for Norfolk about your relationship with your own constituents, I think is worth mentioning. During the HS2 Select Committee considering objections, we went round with you on a number of occasions, And I think people who only see you in public will not know what you're like in private with your constituents. The Speaker is knowledgeable, he's calm, he's reasonably quiet, and people trust him. And that's, I think, is what people can ask of their members of Parliament, and the service you give to them should be remembered in these tributes today. There are other things I could say, but I think the best thing to do is to say that the good you've done should be remembered, the good that we've done you've acknowledged, and were there to be a signal on a motion, we hope that it will be passed with acclamation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for occupying the chair.
Well, let me thank the honourable gentleman who has made the concluding contribution from the backbenches. And in thanking him, I want to register the view that in addition to all his other attributes, the honourable gentleman is a gentleman. What he has said is very much appreciated by me, and it will not be forgotten. I do want to thank colleagues. This is quite an embarrassing experience, and people watching may think it bizarre or surreal, but it is a procedure that very often takes place. It was opened with considerable elan, style and good humour by the Leader of the House. The Leader of the House is one who always places a premium upon the Chamber and regards his overriding duty as to be in it whenever possible. If that were true as a backbencher, it is true almost in triplicate for the holder of a designated office. Most assuredly, it is true for the holder of the office of Leader of the House when business to which he is speaking is involved. Notwithstanding that fact, I do think that the Leader deserves some appreciation for staying from the very start to the very close of this series of exchanges, which has been genuine and sincere, but also long. So I thank the Leader of the House very much indeed, and I would like to thank all colleagues who have spoken. All colleagues who've spoken. They don't owe me anything, and indeed, but I thank them for what they've said. And the honourable gentleman on the Treasury bench says, and those who can't. Well, he and I have known each other a long time, and I told him the other day outside of the chamber how impressed I was by the way in which he conducted himself at the dispatch box. Anybody would have thought that he'd been a minister for many, many, many years, as opposed to virtually an ingenue. But I thank the honourable gentleman for his sedentary chunter. We now come to motion number 1, colleagues, on standards. The Leader of the House to move.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.